All right, I was waiting for Madam Chair to come back, but she'll be here any moment. So let's get this meeting started. Time being 10:39 a.m. on October 27th, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Kane County American Rescue Plan Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates, Brown,
Here.
Froz,
Here.
Gums,
Here.
Kenyon,
Here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Martin,
Martin present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Strathman,
Strathman here.
Tepe,
Tepe here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Have quorum.
And if someone could please ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes of October 6th, 2021, unless there are any changes that would like to be made.
Move.
Ms. Bates asks for unanimous consent. Any opposition?
Mr. Sanchez, yes.
Mr. Tepe?
I don't have them in front of me right now, but there was a line there where Ms. Gums made a statement and the word committee was used and it should have been consultant in that line.
Okay. Okay, then I will have our assistant make that correction. Other than that, we have unanimous consent to approve the minutes. Public comments on agenda and non-agenda items. I do see one speaker signed up, Ms. Bernie May. Would you like to come to the podium and address the committee?
Good morning. It is still morning, right? Yes. Morning, everyone. I'm Bernie May. I'm the Executive Director for Family Service Association. We're located in Elgin. We are a community mental health center that serves children and adolescents and their families, including a 24/7 mobile crisis response program. There's so much going on in the world of mental health today, particularly around children and adolescents. By 3 o'clock yesterday, we had 8 calls for kids in Kane County who were assessed as being suicidal, homicidal, or at some other level of risk to themselves or others. Why do I pick 3 p.m.? Because that's the end of our first shift. So that's 2 crisis workers managing that, traveling through all of Kane County. Normally we have 3, but we don't have 3 because of staffing issues that we're experiencing. The need and the acuity that we see today are just incredible in comparison to who we are used to seeing in King County services. We had a 9-year-old girl who witnessed her father stab her grandfather. We had a 12-year-old boy who disclosed that he has, as a hobby, started hunting cats and dogs because he enjoys watching them die. We had a 13-year-old girl who told us that her uncle prostitutes her to help feed his drug addiction. And that's just this week, and it's Wednesday morning. So as I talked to you about that, and for us to do our work effectively, we are dependent on our partners in the community, including the county departments, as they depend on us. I was at the Juvenile Justice Council meeting just a couple weeks ago, which is convened by the state's attorney's office. And Judge Parga, and for those of you who don't know Judge Parga, she's the juvenile judge here in Kane County, is somebody who works really hard on reform, and she tries to connect kids to the services that they need so that they can exit the justice system and they can stay out of the justice system. But she's talking about how she can't get anybody into services because the waiting lists are so incredibly long. So you can imagine, as she's trying really hard to do the right thing by kids and their families, she's having a hard time getting her job done. And vice versa, as an organization, we experience the same thing when our county departments are not appropriately supported either. When the probation department was on strike a few years ago, that was very hard on our organization as we then picked up some of those follow-up calls that probation would normally do because we work with them to interact with like different weeks so that kids have constant monitoring in place. So we sincerely value our partnerships with the county departments, as I think they sincerely value their partnerships with us. And as you consider all of the options that you have moving forth, I know you have several interdepartmental requests. I think that they also rely on organizations like ours and our community partners to be supported in that process as well. And I know this is a big decision to make, around $103 million, but we appreciate you listening to the voices and helping and allowing us to be a part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. May. Anyone else online? I'm not aware of. Okay. Discussion items, expenditure and allocation update. We don't have the updated allocation worksheet yet. We're working with finance on that still. Something I did forget to put in here though, mission statements. So I've gotten 2 mission statements. That was an idea that came at the last meeting. So there's 3 more that we're looking for just to get everybody's input. So make sure you guys put your heads together and send those in, and we'll try and craft a universal. Mr. Leonard's and Mr. Kenyon's were the first to come in. Happy to know. So, because farmers wake up early, right? Kenyon, you did all the work.
Mr. Kenyon, did you spend a whole half day on it?
So the next item, departmental requests, and I will share my screen. This is a moment you've all been waiting for. Did it work? Did it work, Blair? Can you guys see it? No. Okay. Okay, so we have our groups, and these are the assignments for the groups. Following today's meeting, you will each receive an email with a zip file or a link to a zip file so that you can have access to all of the supporting documents. We're still working on creating the back-end website for things ARPA related, but you will each have all of the supporting documents that were submitted that we have to date, and you can start going through those. I talked with Program Manager Phillips. So he'll be following up with each of you and setting up a meeting the next, 3 to 5 days, just to talk with you guys, see where you're at. We do have some kind of not a checklist, but a kind of a checklist to help you as you go through the projects, determine, which category does it fall under for eligible use? Does it meet does it check some of these other boxes that are mentioned in the internal final rule for the ARPA and things like that, just to help you kind of discern projects one from another. And you guys can determine the best course of action for assessing all of these projects. So I think we had discussed at the last meeting, coming back after about a month's time and then beginning our process of selection. Is that still agreeable to everyone? Does that seem, I mean, it's probably more than enough time, but maybe 2 weeks is not enough. So is that good for everybody? Mr. Tepe?
So the process will be that in conjunction with Peter, we will, each team will set up a meeting with the department to go over their requests.
Yes.
That's the,
Yes.
okay, and it's going to be Peter's job to keep us all in line, right?
He's got the bullwhip and everything, so.
He's just shaking his head. He isn't saying anything.
Mr. Martin?
I have a question about that.
Sure.
We are, my understanding is that we're to meet and then the duos make recommendations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so, I mean, at least from my perspective, I'm just going to assume everything to be hunky-dory with the technicality of the request and just try to make an evaluation, because ultimately our staff or our consultant are going to determine the propriety of that. And we'll probably have to revisit this whole thing and do some shuffling, but I deal better with simple concepts. So, and people will tell you that that's the limit of my ability, but I just want to meet with people and sit down with Michelle and decide what the two of us want to recommend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Whatever,
that's good.
whatever
I just
works.
want to make sure we're
best for
heading off
you
into
guys.
some direction.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mr. Leonard?
Mr. Chairman, with respect to these assignments, which are fine, I don't think anybody has a problem with them. We have the option of doing it in person or via phone, or is there a preference in that area?
I'll leave it up to you, Paul, to determine that. I would think in person would be more ideal.
And what was our timeline?
1 month.
A month.
You figure in 2 meetings, we can discuss this again and get everyone's recommendations and go from there.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
And just to offer the board, we have a room upstairs with the table chairs. So just schedule that with Jane. If you want a neutral meeting room, or if you want to, if you want to go out for coffee, obviously, and do it that way.
Some of these
but-
departments have rooms themselves, some
Mhm.
that are available.
But there is a room upstairs for you.
Then there's the room in the main level too. So,
Did you have another?
well, you can't be
No,
two
I'm
at a
fine.
time for the Peter.
All right, so does that look good for everyone?
Yeah.
All right, so after this meeting, I'll send the files out to you, or at least links to the files, and you can download that and start doing your homework. Have fun. Okay, I can stop sharing screen now.
Peter, can I get your cell number?
Yeah, he'll be reaching out to all you guys, so you can work together. All right, so next up, resolution on the consultant firm. We were hoping to have all the documentation that we all want to see put together by Monday, so that we'd at least have 2 full days to go over it. Just weren't able to get it at that point. So we did receive the statement of work last night, and I think we're just waiting on a couple things for the final contract. But I did send some information out yesterday, whether or not you've had a chance to look at it. We do have a few representatives from Ernst & Young here to talk to us today. So at the very least, we can ask some questions, get out some of our concerns, go over things. And what I would ask is if it would please the committee, if we could have a special meeting next Tuesday, ideally ahead of executive committee, so that assuming we'll have these documents very soon in a final form for us to review, we'll have ample time to review that and then come back together on Tuesday, even via Zoom, if you want to do it from the comfort of your living room, just to discuss and vote on this issue. So would there be any objection to that? Can anyone, is everyone able to make? There are no scheduled meetings here on Tuesday that I'm aware of, so I would say we could do 9 a.m. as a typical starting time, whatever would work for all of you.
And that would be mostly to approve the consultant.
Yes, the consultant firm resolution. Mr. Leonard?
Yes, with respect to your resolution, then we're tabling that for today's meeting.
We'll have a conversation, since we do have representatives from Ernst
Discussion,
&
but
Young.
not a resolution.
Discussion,
to
but
vote
not
on.
a vote. or
So we'll
anything like
table that
Yeah, we don't
resolution.
even need to take any action on the resolution itself. Mr. Tepe?
Do we have a process in place or suggested process for organizations to submit their application?
For organizations on the consultant firm?
No.
That'll be the portal.
Yeah, for the portal.
When we
Is
Open
there,
the portal. Do we know when we're going to open the portal?
Oh, that's a separate issue altogether.
so the consulting organization is going to do the portal? Maybe,
Well, actually, okay, so my understanding, and speaking with Michelle Neerman the other day, is that we will need the consultant firm to help us. Once we establish our criteria for the $4 million program, for instance, we'll need them to establish what kind of documentation requirements we'll have for all of our applicants. So even when we approve at the county board, the program, we'll still have a little time until we can actually open up the portal.
Do we have an idea when the portal will open, an estimation?
Well, once the county board approves it, then, and we have all of the proper back-end documentation requirements in place, then we can open the portal.
Okay.
So we won't know.
That's
Once
the
we have
next
the
board
consultant
meeting?
firm in place, it'll be a short time after that where we can establish all of the necessary documents that we need, so.
Okay. Are we out of order here, possibly? I would like to see the questions that we're asking people on the portal.
Okay, yeah, that's way ahead of where we're at.
Okay,
so.
never mind. Out of order.
Okay, so that being said, Vince, if you could, oh, sorry, Mr. Martin.
We are a month before the duos make recommendations as to what we're going to do relative to county electeds and departments for requests. And this is a question, but do we know enough at this point in time about A, how much money is going to be available, and B, well, I guess it's how much money is going to be available to, in fact, provide instructions in a description of work that describe the reality of what's going on. I mean, when I read the documents, and I understand it can't be a checklist or anything, but if we, in our perfect world, if we sign this today, would Ernst & Young know what it's doing? And in my mind, I don't think we haven't put our instructions together yet. And, you know, I just relate to my life experience. When somebody said they wanted to do something and they came into my office, I would sit down and I would take notes about what their goals was, what the property is they want to buy, what they want to build on it, all those things. And then I could formulate my plan for how I was going to represent them. We're today, it seems like at least a month away from completing a fledgling effort at putting together instructions. And I don't know if I'm Ernst & Young. If I signed this contract today, I don't know what I'd be doing. And if I'm the person that's signing the contract on behalf of the county, I guess I would like the marching orders to be clear enough that I and the board could evaluate what's going on and say, yes, this is what we want. Right now, as I sit in this room, I can't tell you what we want. And if I stand alone on that, then I apologize. But I am apprehensive about creating a statement of work when I don't feel as if I know what the work is. And the descriptions in there without parameters attached, to me, kind of create something like a headless dragon. I mean, they have no instructions of concrete nature. We don't really know what we're doing until we decide it. So I don't want to delay any process, but it seems that if we're going to retain a consultant, the consultant needs to know what in fact we want to do. And I don't feel that we're there yet.
And I think it will be some time until we have our full plan put together as far as how much we want to spend and everything and what projects we're going to fund, from the departments and what other ideas the committee brings forward and the community brings forward that we might
By
consider.
way of example, we don't, so then how do we evaluate estimates of cost on this project if we don't know, if we haven't given, in simple language, we have 10 things we want you to do. What do you estimate this is going to cost? We have given nobody anything except we have a statutory mechanism by which we can decide and which establishes parameters for our decision. But how does anybody look at this and say, well, what's this going to cost?
Ms. Bates.
So do you mean that you think we should go into our small groups, come back with our priorities before we can do anything else?
I feel uncomfortable in signing a work order. I mean, if I were to sit and ask everybody what the true thing is that's going to happen here, the answer is I don't think we know yet.
Nobody knows.
Well, we do know that we have a community support grant program that we're putting together.
Yes.
So that's an immediate
Okay,
thing. And then
yes.
reporting is another aspect, but it's kind of
But
a list of
reporting is
things
not-
that they could do
But what's our reporting timeline? I mean, we're quite a way, are we not, from the next report?
in January. Yeah. Madam Chair.
There we go. It's all reporting data is from December 31st due in January. So it's the end of this calendar year. If I may piggyback on what Mr. Martin is saying, I'm the one who asked for a mission statement. I frankly don't know what our goals are. And that's to me, our goals. I don't know what the goals of the ARP committee is. Are we looking at, Ms. Bates wants half of the money to go to not-for-profit organizations, community-based organizations. There has been talk here, Mr. Leonard says that we should take a look at repair, capital expenses that are badly needed in the county as well. as well as some savings for next year's. If we need to allocate that, if we don't need it, it'll be used at future grants, initiatives that we may have. I really don't know what we're doing. And I mean, I don't mean to be that critical because there's 10 very fine minds here. But what are our goals based on what the Treasury suggests to relieve COVID? Is our goal to make sure that we have quality water? We have 15 applications for water, I saw that. Do we want to increase the health department's outreach to community? I think that discussion based on ARP criteria needs to happen organically based on that mission statement values that we have here in the county that is developed by this committee, because everything else is going to be measured against that. If you have a business, and I'm looking right now, and you're making milk products, you want to make the best cheese possible, but you can't make all kinds of cheese. You may not have a blue cheese cave or whatever, but you want to make something very specific, and you have goals and objectives on how to get to that and how much product you're going to be making. We don't have that. I don't know what this committee's real objective is. And budget objective, I think, is also very critical. Do we want to spend 70% of this money internally, 30% externally? We've allocated 10%, potentially 10% for administrative costs. We've seen what Ernst & Young is proposing, but that is not going to carry us on to 25 or 26. So I would like less, I want more dialogue, what I'm looking for amongst this team of 10 and 11. What do you want to do with the money? What's our goals for the county?
Well, and I think that is the nature of what our meetings have been, and going through these departmental requests is going to be a big part of that, because those asks are all relative to the ARPA in one way or the other.
Oh, I
And-
agree with
and
you
so
on that.
That's how we're going to determine what this committee really wants. We could each survey, we could survey the committee and say, what would you want to spend it on? And we have done that in a way. But again, once we look at the actual requests that we have coming in, then we can kind of form which direction we want to go.
But
So-
I don't mean to, I hope you don't misunderstand me. It's about the goals. What are we trying to do here for the county? Minus the money. What are our goals? What's the mission? It's different from the budget. The budget will follow through with that mission statement. That mission statement should come first, and then everything else comes secondly. And it's in the Treasury. It's in their guidelines. Which ones do we want to do?
Mr. Chair, Gums.
Gums, go ahead.
I do apologize for the background noise. I'm having a tire issue. Speaking on Madam Chair's position, in my effort to create a mission statement, I think what we're getting at is what is the spirit of this American Rescue Plan? So I went to the White House page to refresh my memory on the spirit of the American Rescue money and what it's designed for. It gives a very nice summary, and it did remind me of certain things that should be priorities. So I would suggest that each of us take a look at that to remind us the intent of this plan, so that we can go forward with the spirit and the goal. As Madam Chair suggested, it's very kind of up in the air, but I found it extremely helpful to go through this synopsis and remind myself what this plan is designed for. And that should be the root of our goal. So whitehouse.gov, you can find it under American Rescue Plan, just so we all are on the same page, what the spirit is and how we can best assist our county through that spirit.
Thank you, Ms. Gums. I will say there's different ways of looking at this. Do we wait until we figure out all of the possible expenses that we want to have for this program, all the things we want to put money on, and then get a consultant firm? or do we get a consultant firm in tandem with our decision-making process? And so in the spirit of that, and this resolution, we asked representatives of Ernst & Young to come and speak with us today, hoping we'd have a little more documentation in hand to look at before this meeting. But since we don't, and since they're here, I'd like to call them up. And we'll come back to conversation on this, just so that we can have this conversation. So Gabe, if you guys could please come up. And they can kind of answer these questions that you guys have and see what you think, and we'll go from there.
Good morning. Thank you for having us today. Appreciate it. So I think maybe we'll start with a couple of introductions, myself and my colleague Gary, and then we'll give a little bit of background on ourselves and our firm. And then, if you have any questions about what we've proposed to serve the county, we'd be happy to answer questions you'll have. It's been great to listen to the dialogue here. So briefly, my name is Gabe Sanders. I lead Ernst & Young EY's public sector business here in the state of Illinois. I have been with the firm for about 10 years now, going on 11, and serve all of public sector clients in the state of Illinois is my role in sort of leading teams and engagements as we deliver services to those clients here in the state. Longtime King County resident, live just down the street in St. Charles. Been in the area for about 20 years. So very proud of that. And so for me, this project is not only a professional endeavor for our firm, but it's also a personal matter for me. It's very fulfilling to be potentially engaged by the county where I live to help with such an important matter as ARPA funding. So looking forward to the conversation here with you all today. So my colleague, Gary.
Thanks, Gabe. My name is Gary Burke. Very happy to be with you all today. I'm a partner in our GPS practice, our government public sector practice. I'm really focusing on the CARES Act and ARPA Act for the past 18 months or so. So part of my responsibilities is the leadership of how EY is responding to that, and specifically how we're helping clients with not only the interpretation, but the implementation of what's included in the ARPA and the fiscal recovery funds, so that when counties, cities, and states do spend the money, they do so in a compliant manner to eliminate or mitigate the risk of recoupment. Because unlike other funds, these funds come with some significant strings attached to it, some sort of significant compliance and reporting requirements that are additive and different than what was there for the CARES Act and the Coronavirus Relief Fund specifically. So part of my job for assisting my clients and the firm's clients is making sure that our clients spend the money in a compliant way so the risk of recoupment is small or close to zero as possible.
And I might add, just as a point of sort of calling out what we see nationally, I applaud the county, frankly, for considering this early. We are seeing a number of local governments, cities, counties, and some states procuring services on this issue. And there are a number that are issuing RFPs and bringing consulting firms in to help them. There are a number that have acknowledged they have a need but haven't yet done so. And then there are a number that will, I think, generally tell you they have it under control, but they also have acknowledged there's likely that they will seek services as well. So you all are leading in that front. We've seen a number of RFPs from counties, and a lot of places we have not yet, but we would expect that to follow. So you're definitely a leader in that respect. So we're happy to answer questions you all have about the services we would offer and what we would do. I can share with you, we are engaged by a couple of the largest state agencies in the state of Illinois, Department of Healthcare and Family Services, the Department of Human Services, assisting them with their ARPA funding. And really what we're doing there, Gary leads those engagements, so he can speak in even more detail. But I think the critical element of where you all are here is in the program design phase, as you're considering those requests, right? Looking at those both from a practical perspective and sort of what the county's goals and needs are, but also from a compliance lens and from a applicability perspective. And then I think Commissioner Gumbs made a comment about looking at the spirit of the act and comparing what that funding is to what was intended from the program. So kind of taking all those things into consideration when you're designing your program and making those choices on allocation is really critical. And part of what we would do would be part of helping think you through that process and kind of be a check and a balance on things that are questionable or things you want to do that maybe fit the guidelines, or find ways to help it fit the guidelines when you're not sure. And that's part of our expertise, and we can bring a national lens. Who's not with us today are I don't know, roughly a couple 200 people in our practice that focus on this. National leaders, former FEMA executives, former inspector generals in the federal government, who think about these types of programs both from a design perspective and from a back-end and compliance perspective. So we can bring a lot of expertise that I think if you went back and looked at the conversation we had in our interview, we brought a number of those folks in to present. And so those are folks we can tap as well to gain experience from counties in New Jersey or counties in Florida, counties in California that we serve, to compare and contrast what others are doing. So I think that's an important thing to note as well.
You gave a couple points I wanted to make just proactively. You know, $103 million is a significant amount of money, but it's not endless. And so I think, you know, applying that money to the best projects to make the most impact to the community is paramount to being successful. What we're finding is that more federal funds are coming out. There's the infrastructure plan that's being worked on by the Hill right now. There's state money that's going to be allocated to help some of the counties and cities and some of the infrastructure projects. So what we do at EY is take a very holistic view of federal funding. We monitor very closely for changes in what is happening on Capitol Hill, what it might do to the state's funding, what it might do to counties funding, so that if for example, broadband is one of the projects that you might select, there's other funding that's coming out for broadband. And so is it the right use of your $103 million to greenlight a broadband project when there's other funding available? So that's some of the things as we think about greenlighting projects or the project evaluation is like, where might other funds to fund that project be available, and to preserve your fiscal recovery funds for projects that may not be covered under other federal grant funds or other state funds. And then I just want to go to Mr. Martin's question about, or perhaps statement about engagement, how we work. So our services are on demand. So even if we were to be engaged in short order, we don't, you know, cut you an invoice immediately for the full service, because we don't know what the full service would be. It's based on what you need, what you ask us to do. So I think that from a timing perspective, you know, what we see as best practices to be involved early at a tangential level to help appreciate and understand the projects and appreciate some of the duplication of benefit. But the majority of our work may not start for a number of weeks or a number of months as the committee in this room determines which projects they want to greenlight.
And I just would add to that real briefly, and then certainly answer any questions you have, but we're serving a county in Southern Illinois today. And that is a similar example to what we have here. They're just getting their program off the ground. They're making some decisions internally. They're looking at requests from various departments and external stakeholders. And so we've really been involved, but we have been involved at a limited capacity at the beginning. That will quickly ramp up as they make decisions on allocations. We start to vet those in terms of compliance and looking at the requirements in the federal rule that is out there that you have to abide by, along with uniform guidance requirements, which are also a consideration here. But we started very slowly there, a couple of calls, a couple of meetings. We, again, bill hourly. So it's not something where we're just writing an invoice, as Gary mentioned, for the whole fee up front, and you're just having us sit there for a month. We don't operate that way. But I do think over time, it will quickly ramp up as your team and you all decide to make those choices around funding. You'll start to see us very active very quickly once you are ready for us to do that.
Anyone have any questions at this point? Ms. Bates?
I feel like Hermione Greengold. It's a Harry Potter thing.
Oh.
Me. So do you, sirs, agree with Mr. Martin's concern? You addressed it a little bit, that we are maybe not ready to get you involved until we have our parameters set. And which brings me to my second and third questions, which I'm going to lump together. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? And by which I kind of mean getting our parameters set, deciding our own priorities from the internal projects, or I mean, what you just brought up is very interesting, that there might be more money coming for broadband. So take that out of this basket, speaking of chickens and eggs. And is it eligible? And then the eligibility. We decided to pick our priorities before we asked you to pick eligibility. But maybe those could be done together so that we're not wasting time on things that you would say, throw it out, throw it out. There. Those are
Maybe I can hit one answer to one question, and I know Gary has some
Okay.
thoughts on this as well. Not to sound self-serving, so to be clear that I'm self-aware on this, I do believe having a consulting firm, whether it was us or someone else, in the room, helping you as you're making those decisions and those considerations is a really important element. So I don't agree that it's good to wait. And I say that because program design is such an element, a critical element of what you're going to do for all the reasons I just mentioned, whether it be highest and best use of funds, whether it be compliance with federal guidance, whether it be compliance with the spirit of the law, right? Looking at the best use of those funds, There are two other sort of issues here. And here, I'm gonna let you go into deeper, but duplication of benefit is an issue that we want to talk about a little bit. But also, when those infrastructure dollars will flow, and let's assume that they do for a minute. If you're spending money on that infrastructure, does that make sense? If you had money you wanted to put forth for rental assistance, that may also be not a great idea. It might not be a bad idea either. But the state has rental assistance money. And so you don't want to perhaps use your funds where other agencies have money today or they will have it in the future. So really taking that into account, I think is a really important part, that if it's missed on the front end, respectfully, you lose some of that ability to pivot later, because at some point it becomes, I just hate to say too late, you have time here. There's several years to allocate this money, but decisions are made. And so it's hard to sort of change plans later. So Gary, I don't know if you want to spend a little more time talking about some of these issues, but to me, I think being good program design is having somebody helping you right away think through some of these challenges and comparing notes from other engagements we have and what we see nationally.
Question, Shepro.
With the answer.
Yeah, they were going to address another point, Shepro, and then I'll take your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief, Gabe. I think you covered it quite well. Maybe to the chicken and the egg, I like the way you articulated that. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer as to when you bring a consultant in. I think it's important, certainly before you start spending money, that you have consulted in and helping determine the eligibility and looking at that from a view of the federal compliance, but also what other agencies are doing, what other states, what other counties, what other cities are doing with their federal funds. I'm happy to talk more about that in detail. But part of the program design, just to underscore Gabe's point a little more, is identifying how you, the county, want to determine eligibility.
Determine eligibility. Okay.
Determine eligibility, because yes, there are federal requirements, but as a provider of funds to subrecipients, you have the opportunity to add additional requirements. Not only from what the funds can be used, how they can be used, what reporting you need to receive from the individuals or entities that receive your funds, and then how are you going to monitor that? And so really the end-to-end management process is established and articulated at the very beginning. And as Gabe said, it's not impossible to rewind the clock if we wait some time, but it becomes much more difficult and involves more time for us to do that.
Mr. Shepro, your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I guess in listening to some of your comments today and things that we've raised before, I still have trouble visualizing, like, for example, you outlined you'd be good to have someone in the room when some of these discussions are taking place. And maybe you could help me and possibly others understand, what does that actually mean? And let me sort of ask some background on that, is that in looking at some of the documents and statements that have been made before, there seems to be some question as to whether there seems to be disclaimers in much of what's been submitted so far about the extent of whether you're going to opine on things, whether you're going to simply hand us the regulations and say, these are all the applicable regulations. For example, and the duplication, is it essentially that your function is to, from your own database and experience, tell us about other programs that we should be aware of, or simply to remind us that we should be looking for them ourselves? Maybe you could walk me through how would you envision you would be involved in the room, for example, in the kinds of discussions that Mr. Martin has, and I think others have indicated, is what we feel we need to do? What would your participation in that process be? I mean, are you going to say, no, we really don't think this should be a priority, or no, we don't think this is going to comply with the regulations? Or maybe you want to think about that you could impose additional requirements. I guess I'm having trouble understanding how you decide what to weigh in on. And part of that is if you're there to answer our questions and we don't know what questions to ask, then there seems to be a fundamental disconnect getting the process underway?
Appreciate the question. Gary, I wonder if it makes sense to share a little bit, maybe a little bit of a description of how we've served some of our other clients, some of the ones we talked about, maybe others as well, just to give context to how we become, I think, ingrained in the project team as considerations are going on and sort of the questions are being asked to the point that was made, but also the things that we bring to the table, maybe using some of the examples we've done.
Yeah, sure. So I think from the list that was displaying on the screen, there's 77 some odd projects that need to be evaluated through the duo conversations. If we were to sit in those meetings, I think it would be from an active listener perspective. So we would understand what's being discussed and what the intent is of each of these projects to help evaluate not only the compliance requirements, but what is the level of effort to administer a project. So for example, if you were to make a smaller, high volume, small grants, so 500, 1,000 other grants to hundreds or thousands of individuals, that is extremely much more difficult to administer from a federal compliance perspective than if you made 10 $1 million grants, as an example. So being able to provide you that real-time feedback, not in that meeting, but separately when we're outside of those discussions as to what we heard and how others have dealt with a similar project and administered that project, is one of the ways that I would see us participating. Clearly, if there's things that are being discussed, we will take notes, and then if there's significant eligibility concerns, we would share those as well. But we also share best practices on things that were discussed and how we've seen them implemented in other places. Because it is an ability of ours to pull from our national exposure to see how other counties and cities have deployed their funds and aligned their programs and projects.
And I would add, I think where we've been successful, and keep in mind, the CRF and now the ARPA is 18 months old, right? So before this, there was no CRF, no ARPA. So we're all, as a group here, but EY as well, all firms are kind of moving at lightning pace to kind of get their hands around this as the guidance routinely has changed, right? And so reporting deadlines come up, but also the request for funds is growing. And so what we've been able to do successfully over the last couple of years now, 18 months, is become very ingrained in the day-to-day process. And so it's not an everyday 8 hours a day thing, but as committee meetings are held, as internal team meetings are held with different departments, we become basically a part of the team. And so we're there to hear the discussions, we're there to participate, we're there to share best practices, we're there to give guidance where you're thinking about something, you look to us and say, well, what have you seen in other counties? What have you seen them not do or do? And so that becoming ingrained in the team really gives us the ability to give you what we think is the best perspective and the best guidance that we can based on our experience, based on what you're being asked to do from all your stakeholders. I think really serves well. We are not a come in and tell you what to do type of firm. That's just not how we operate. We operate in a very collaborative, consultative way to make sure that we're kind of listening to you, but also sharing with you things you need to hear. So sometimes we'll give you counsel that said, counsel, not law firm, but we'll give you advice to say, hey, look, this is a way you could do it this way or that way. To Gary's point, you may want to be more restrictive in your guidance or your requirements than perhaps the federal rules require, and that's okay. And sometimes you want to take it right to the letter of what the guidance says, and that's okay too. But I think you have to think about really ingraining us and using us where we're best, which is being part of the team. So hopefully that answers your question.
I follow up.
Supplement that. Sorry, go ahead.
I just had a quick follow-up on that, Mr. Chairman. I guess my follow-up would be, we've had some very long meetings, and I'm wondering if for what they've outlined or you've outlined that you would be doing, is it necessary that you sit through the entire meeting and listening to our discussion? Or when we have some specific questions or even some specific action, that you would look over what we have talked about, and instead of sitting for an hour and a half listening to us, you can comment after the fact. I'm not sure that, well, I'll leave it at that.
Sure. No, it's a fair question. I'm happy to address it. I think working with Peter, working with you all, I think it's going to depend on what you ask us to do, right? But also I think there may be some meetings where there's a planning meeting, that you want to really get into the weeds on some of the requests and some of the things you're being challenged with. Certainly we can be part of that. If there are meetings you think it's not necessarily appropriate or, a meeting you think we need to be there for 3 hours, we're fine to kind of take the summary notes from the team, give our perspective on that, maybe have a separate call to kind of drill into questions we have about them. I think, again, it's really your comfort level and how you use us. There will be things we say we really need to be involved in that discussion and sort of make our point about that, because there are things we need to know. But I think it's what you're willing to share with us. And really, at the end of the day, the two-way street really works best with a consulting firm, because we want to share as much as we can. But in order to share, we have to be able to be at least involved on the main meetings that go on where decisions are being considered. So yes, we're absolutely open to, however you think it's best, so long as we can give you the guidance that we think is appropriate.
I feel as if we're back to Ms. Bates' point about the chicken and egg, though. I mean, if it depends on what we ask you to do, how do we find out what we should be asking you to do? I guess I think that's maybe implicit in the question that was posed earlier. That's a comment more than a question at this point.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a couple comments and then maybe a question for the consultants. As far as the mission statement, I agree we should know what we're doing, but maybe what Ms. Gums just suggested could be simply our mission statement. What the federal government has outlined that money is intended to be used for could be what our mission statement is. I know we probably need to fine tune it down a little bit from there, but it probably isn't as difficult as what I was thinking it might be. Secondly, we do have the $4 million commitment that I know everybody in the audience and others are sitting chomping at the bit waiting to get. So the longer we talk about this, the longer that's delayed. So I think we need to do whatever we can to help get that money out into the community. And how we do that sooner than later is another question. I'm going to ask our consultants, our possible consultants, to step ahead here a little bit and consult us. And what I'm going to ask you is you've probably heard that there's been 70 some requests from our departments on the funds for different projects that they're looking for. And what the committee has decided on up to this point is to break it down into groups of 2 to evaluate these questions. Do you think that that's a good way to go about that? Or should a consultant be brought in either during that process or before that process to look at those requests to not waste time and to make sure that what we're reviewing, here's my concern, that we could sit down and we could look at I could look at 5 different requests and I could say, well, I think the 5th one is the most noteworthy and this is the one we really need to go for. And then maybe number 4 is a good one and maybe number 3, so okay. Maybe number 2 and number 1, no, maybe not so noteworthy. But yet when it gets to the consultant to review as for its eligibility, consultant's going to say number 5 doesn't meet all these requirements, or maybe it meets one but doesn't really meet the other one. So maybe as a board member sitting here reviewing these requests that I'm going to be reviewing, am I looking at those requests in the right frame of mind and doing them justice? So I'm going to ask you, do you think the process we've come up with of breaking it down into groups of 2 and reviewing them is the right way to go?
Back to the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give my perspective, having just seen it on the screen for a couple of seconds. But it seemed like a logical way to break down the task of assessing the 77 some odd projects. My takeaway from looking at the slide was 2 people are having the conversation in 2 different groups or multiple groups. How is there consistency among the evaluation? So if one department is being judged at a higher level than another department, are they getting an equal treatment? So I think the equity and the rigor and templates and the documentation surrounding the dual meetings, I think, is imperative to when you bring those together. How are you establishing a consistent evaluation across all the departments? I think as far as the consultant's perspective, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's no right answer to that. Certainly, there could be value of the consultants being active listeners and providing feedback to the committee members after the meetings. or if there is documentation that's maintained and created during those conversations, a review and assessment of those documentations could also be very effective.
I would just add, I think what Gary just said, at least for me, is a little more of a, there is a chicken and egg question here, but having that consultant firm on the front end brings that perspective that was just brought there, which is to have a fair and consistent way of measuring projects in each of these different groups, for example, that's established right up front. That's something that we would do as table stakes in an engagement, where we sit down and say, okay, what is your next step? Your next step is to go through these different pillars, I'll call them, or working groups. How do you assess that each group is getting sort of the right look and getting the right sort of treatment when it comes to an equitable chance at those funds? And now we're also talking about 77 internal, correct? That's not any external requests. Was I reading that right? Right. So you might have 120 or maybe more, 150 or 200 sort of things coming at you. And so how do you look at those from an external perspective?
Right.
Same thing, you have to give an equitable approach to how you're evaluating it. So there's no one saying we didn't get an equal shot here. And those are things that we can bring to the table, being at the table right away, as opposed to being brought in later when you've had these decisions made, when you've sort of talked about them and people are getting comfortable with the notion of how dollars are going to be spent. To your point, number 5 may not be applicable. It may not fit the guidelines, and it may be challenged, or may just not be the right spend because there's new federal funding for water treatment coming through for the infrastructure bill. You may want to put that off because something has changed in the federal landscape. So all these things are, I mean to say, having somebody on the front end, I think really helps you be more informed going into it. Our sort of thing we say a lot is good program design results in good outcomes. Poor program design or limited thought going into the program design, you wind up with lesser than optimal results, which at the end of the day can be a challenge when it comes to federal compliance, the potential for clawbacks in the future that can come up when you have federal funds of this nature. So bringing in a firm in early is really critical, in my opinion.
Mr. Martin, you had your hand up a moment ago after Mr. Brown. Did you still have a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, first off, I agree with Madam Chair. We need to conclude the process of saying what it is we want to do. The other thing is, in evaluating these 70 some odd applications that we have from county related individuals and electeds, I don't think any of them submitted them without the intention or without the belief that they were valid projects that in their mind fits the parameters established under this statute to the best of their knowledge to interpret it. So it seems, as I think through this, and we have a dollar amount attached to those, at least in an estimate of what they are. It may be that the threshold question is to determine the huge budget, which is what percentage is going to go to county supported activities and what percent is going to be distributed to the general public. Because if we say we're going to give, just pull numbers out of the blue, if we're going to give 10% to the county and 90% otherwise, then let's not waste time going through all of these applications. I mean, I don't envision Michelle and I sitting down with the state's attorney and the sheriff and say, oh, you know, this really doesn't make a lot of sense. Their intention as elected people as elected officials was to address needs within their office. And I like the idea of direct committee involvement, but I think we need to announce what the general goal is that we have here, and B, make a decision. You know, there's a dollar amount here. How much are we going to give? How much are we going to give external to the county? I mean, that really is, that question in my mind is paramount to anything else, because it drives the entire conversation. If we are not going to address everything that the county has asked for, then by definition, that means we're going to cull the herd. And I think we need to, I think philosophically, we need that discussion. Otherwise, we're kind of missing the head of the nail.
Mr. Frost, or sorry, Mr. Leonard was next.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. You know, I guess the 300-pound gorilla in the room here for me is, how much is this going to cost? I mean, I'm sure you guys have looked at what you want to do, what you hope to do. What are the parameters and what's the timeline? Are you looking at a minimum amount of cost and a maximum? What are those? And then what timeline are you looking at if you get your ideal scenario or get one that we give to you?
You want to talk a little bit about our timeframes and our scope in terms of the fees and how we structured that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've given a couple different figures, one in our response and the other is the SOW that you may have.
Would you get closer to the mic, please?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So we've given a couple figures, estimates. One was in our response, the RFP, RFQ, and the other was in the SOW for the first 6 months. And so the way that we created both of those figures and the supporting details surrounding that is based on our experience with the Coronavirus Relief Fund and other clients that we have with the American Rescue Plan. Albeit the American Rescue Plan is in its infancy. We've only had one reporting process so far. The other one's been delayed. We expect more in the future. But it's also informed by the conversations we've had with other counties, cities, and states as to how they want to use their funds and the need and urgency to get the funds out quickly, and also the timing in which they want to fund some of these projects. Some of our estimates were based on the level of grant that we, I think, discussed in maybe some of the Q&A we had in the process, but like, for example, micro grants. So smaller grants, application-based to individuals, that is quite expensive to administer because there's review of the applications, there's monitoring of their use of the funds, there's the technology to solicit and collect the applications. Again, it's a more costly endeavor. That is not something that we contemplated in our figures. Our scope is based on helping with a very thorough program design, and that most of the funds, and not all the funds, will be programmed in the first 6 months, which is what was in the SOW. And then from there, after we program design, when we do the program design, it's the end-to-end design of the program. So it's how are we going to determine eligibility of not only the projects, but also eligibility of how the recipients can use the funds. How are we going to perform a risk assessment that's required by the federal regulations for any subrecipients? How are we going to monitor the use of the funds? Because the federal government has the opportunity to audit and then seek recoupment. How are we going to plan for the closeout? So the proactive communication that we've received the monitoring information and all things are in order, which is the end of the life cycle of the grant. And then I think most importantly is the contemporaneous documentation of all the things I just mentioned. So how is the program designed at the onset? What's the plan to do monitoring? How is the monitoring executed? What are the results of the monitoring? And not to mention the various and evolving requirements from the Treasury. So they had the interim final rule, which is quite lengthy. They've, I think, 30 pages of compliance and reporting. There's FAQs that are updated on a fairly regular basis. And the annual report, the interim was due at the end of August. There's another one due, I think, in end of January, excuse me. That requires significant KPIs and significant use of evidence. And so there's a pretty heavy lift on how are we maintaining the documentation so that if and when Treasury comes asking for it, an audit or desk review, we have that contemporaneously prepared and ready to be provided.
You know, I understand there are a lot of variables here and I appreciate that. And I know you guys are looking at every possible scenario. I guess my question is a little bit more simple, not so complex.
How much?
What do you think the minimum amount is that we'll spend here if we don't use everything you suggest? And what is the maximum? And what is the time frame for that?
Well, yeah, so we estimated in our statement of work that it would be roughly 640,000 for the first 6 months of work. I think was the number to be rounded number. What we took that was basically a best estimate of what we don't know, right? What we don't know is how much you'll use us. So again, this is an hourly engagement that we're proposing, and I think is the right way to do it. There's going to be a ramp, and there's going to be an arc to this. Gary mentioned a lot of things that are assumptions we had to make. So this could be, and I have to be careful with my words here. This could be a $200,000 engagement. It could be a $650,000 engagement. In our proposal, we put that we roughly estimated over a multi-year engagement somewhere just at $1 million in fees, but we don't know. And so I think, to be clear, this is something where we weekly, monthly with our clients kind of sit down, assess where we are. You tell us how much you want to involve us. We're working with you collaboratively. But we did estimate at that kind of mid $600,000 number because most of the program design should be, doesn't have to be, but should be done in the first 6 months. The big lift here, and I shouldn't say the only lift, it's a big lift, is that program design element, setting up everything for success. That should happen in the first 6 months. We made an assumption that would be the case. If that were to be stretched out to a longer period, you may be charged less than that 640 in the first 6 months. It might be 300,000. It just depends on how much effort you all put into this, how much progress you make. It might skew that number to the back half of the engagement, where it might be 300 and then it gets into 500,000-600,000 year two. It's really going to depend on how you use us. And so I guess I have no perfect answer for you, but to say that it's hourly, it's what you use us for. And if after a year you say, look, we're good here, we've done a lot of great work and we want to kind of limit the time, we understand that. But at the same time, we roughly estimate $1 million would be the number over the course of what a 3-year project.
And so I guess, thank you very much for the answers. So I guess maybe the only other question I have is, what is your hourly rate?
We have a rate card on our statement of work. I believe it's on the documents we have. Our partner rate is, I believe, 305. And I think our staff rate was in the 175 number on this.
So with respect to attending meetings, would it be one staff and one individual? So we're looking about maybe $500 an hour for the meetings?
Yeah, it depends, right? So I will tell you, we limit to the extent that we can our higher cost rates depending on the needs. So some of the things that we can assign to tasks that are for a lesser role in the firm in terms of experience and an hourly rate, we do that. We try to leverage our engagements down to the lowest number we can to be, conscious of the dollars that we're spending for you all. There are certain projects you want Gary to be at every meeting, right? You want some of our national experts involved in those discussions because they're bringing that perspective. Somebody who's going to pull spreadsheets together and do those types of projects, they're going to be somebody who's a staff or a senior consultant at a lower rate. So we're very cognizant of that to make sure that we're maximizing the budget that you have and not bringing 10 people to a meeting and charging you $1,000.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answers.
Mr. Frost.
Thank you very much. I guess I'd just like to make 3 points to maybe help steer us in the right direction if you agree. Or as far as the chicken and egg question, I think it's pretty simple. I think we need to bring the consultant on as soon as possible. Why would we start down a road with a big project and not have them on board and bring them on later? For example, today they brought up the issue of broadband, some information that they had garnered from previous clients. That alone is like gold, that comment. So I think we should bring the consultant on as soon as possible and have them here. And frankly, it's going to take some of the workload off this committee. I mean, we just can't be doing every single minute detail of this project. So I'm all for bringing the consultant on as soon as possible. I do agree with, I was thinking along the same lines as Mr. Brown and the issue of the emergency funds. We set aside $4 million, I think it was, in emergency funds. And that was because it was an emergency. So I agree with Chairman Sanchez's, going ahead and trying to take care of that right away. That should be our first priority, and that's what we're working on. So I agree with you that we should, work on those projects, get that set aside. We heard testimony first thing in the meeting today of the urgent need for those funds. So that should be our top priority. And then getting over to what Mr. Martin and Madam Chairman, Mr. Leonard brought up, as far as I do feel that there is a deficit for some of us as far as we need to have a pie chart or a percentage chart or something of what we want to spend this money on, what we all agree it should be spent on, and have categories that we can put that into, as well as within those categories, having a somewhat of a general fund where we could put excesses in or take them out if some other project comes along. So those, I think, are the 3 priorities in my list.
Any other questions? Madam Chair.
I was speaking to Michelle Mehrman yesterday, and she brought to my attention, please correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding. Aren't we supposed to have, as a county, a statement on our homepage for the ARPA committee stating what our the goals and objectives are. And isn't that required by this fund? That we do have published plans, which is, go back, I won't restate the mission statement, a budget analysis or a budgetary goal, and the objectives of the county's expenditure of these funds. Doesn't that have to be done, and shouldn't that be clearly uploaded onto that website?
I don't see
That's
that
the
in there.
recovery plan. So it is on our website currently.
But
That's the initial document we created with a lot of unknowns. So it's very general and that we want to populate with more specific details as is being discussed here.
okay, so that's just broad, and we have to make it much more specific to
Yes.
Kane County's needs.
Do you mean that that's in the CARES program? Because I don't see that in the interim ruling. that we have to-
It's called the recovery plan report.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't hear the question.
My question is,
Could you use the mic?
yes, sir. My question is, does the interim ruling talk about putting something on our, well,
Everything comes from the interim final rule.
what page?
I think it's 355.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's our recovery plan. And again, it was general. We had to turn it in earlier this year. And we know there wasn't a lot for us to talk about at that point in time, but we will be populating it with more information as we go along. So we don't have to wait until next year when the next recovery plan is due to update that on our website as we come up with that pie chart, which I think we should do very soon. That can be updated and put on our website for all to see. Mr. Martin?
This is somewhat repetitive, but the quality of the representation, and I like Ernst and Young. Okay, but the quality of our representation is substantially going to be affected by the degree to which they understand what we're wanting. And I know I'm repetitive when I say this, but we need to answer some of these, 6-inch brush questions. How much money are we going to make available outside of county entities? Okay, if they don't have that instruction, part of their advice is going to be premised upon a decision that we haven't made yet. So we need, Drew calls it a pie chart, whatever it is. We need ourselves to have made that decision, or Ernst and Young is going to be whistling in the dark because they're going to sit and evaluate some program, not knowing if we are going to have enough money left to fund it yet, because we haven't decided.
To that point, I wouldn't imagine we would ask them to evaluate programs until we do have that allocation. But what I'm hearing is maybe at our next regularly scheduled meeting, we should have that discussion on allocation amounts based on category and come up with some numbers. I think that would probably be helpful for everyone in this conversation. And then if we know how much we want to spend on departmental requests, as we go through all of those projects, we can prioritize them, and then we can start plotting them into that. If it's going to be $50 million for departmental requests, then we start filling that in with $50 million worth of projects that we feel are top priority. And then that can be handed off to our consultant firm to look at and, go through that process. So, Madam Chair.
I appreciate the fact that we're going to be looking at allocating just broad stroke budgeting, but it should be based on data. So how are we going to find that data to know that we're allocating in the appropriate category? We've heard a lot about mental health here from the not-for-profits, from our health department. I've heard on the radio that 1 out of every 3 Americans have suffered mental health issues during this COVID crisis. That's data. Actually, it's anecdotal data, but I think there's hard data with that as well. We know that there may be needs for additional roads. I don't know, or repair of our roads or our bridges. we have that data, but is that something that should be funded with ARPA money, or are we going to wait for infrastructure money to come through? What's the criteria that we're going to be using to make those determinations? I think it's just important to have that.
That is, again, that's something I have spoken about in these meetings in regards to a consultant firm, is having a team that can help us with that planning process. So when we have certain specific questions and information that we need, they can gather that for us and answer any, questions of eligibility and things like that. So that's one way we could do it. Another way is just in 2 weeks, we all get together and with our own opinions, we make general rough allocations, create that pie chart, so to speak, and use that at least as a guiding stone for what else we're going to fund. So it's really the will of the committee and how you would want to go about that. Mr. Tepe.
Mr. Chair, and I know we're getting on in time here and we've got other things to cover, but the key idea associated with us establishing 5 teams was to, one, get everybody in the committee involved to some degree in the details. Okay, that way I think we'll have a much better understanding. And the second thing was to talk about, well, going against what Mr. Martin said earlier, I think it's our job to flush out those ideas that we think should not be included from the internal requests that have been made. And that's the 2 things that I think need to be accomplished by taking a look at these 78 requests. We should be able to get that done.
Take out, flush out, or flesh out?
Flush out,
Flush out, okay,
we might say these are not things that we think
flush out, okay,
we want to fund
okay.
for whatever reason. But regardless, I think we're all going to learn a hell of a lot more by going over our 15 or 16. And I'm anxious to get out of this meeting and get started on that list.
I do think by going through that exercise, we will have more information available to us about what we might do with the money. And not to throw more complexity on it, some of these requests coming from departments are geared towards the community and not the department itself.
And that's fine.
So that, how we slice up that pie chart kind of becomes a little different. It's a complex program. There's a lot of different variables, a lot of different ways to slice it. That's something I've said the whole time. So I think everyone appreciates that at this point. Ms. Bates.
I just have a comment. As I was up late reading this last night, I noticed that low income is mentioned 18 times in the ruling, or the interim ruling. Minorities, the word minorities is mentioned 6 times. Disadvantaged is mentioned 18 times. Nonprofits 4 times, communities 73 times. Poverty 22 times, and children 20 times. So low income, minority, disadvantaged, nonprofits, communities, children, and poverty are mentioned many times in the ruling. So I want us to keep that in mind. And may I read my my mission statement, since I did it,
We're
nobody
not
else
going to do
did?
that right now. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll come back to that one.
Thank
when we get
you for
everyone's
thank you for
ideas.
what I managed to get in here. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments now while we have Ernst & Young here with us? Anything else you guys want to get answered? We did receive the statement of work last night. So we do have that. That will be distributed to everyone. And ideally, we will have a contract, a formalized contract put together that addresses all the things our legal teams have been hashing out. Not to blame lawyers, but as soon as that is together, that will be distributed as well. So
Always blame the lawyers.
we gotta love our lawyers. So as soon as all of that is received, it will be sent out, and ideally with enough time to have a vote next Tuesday. I believe everyone agreed we could have a special meeting. If it seems that we don't have the documentation necessary in time, then I think there would probably be no need for that meeting. So fingers crossed that we get it. So you guys have at least 48 hours to go over all the documents, and if there are any questions that you have, we can get that out on Tuesday. But did you have another question?
Comment and a question. As far as setting up these special meetings, I mean, we've had an awful lot of them that were 3 days notice and things like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I speak for everybody that, if we can piggyback them behind another meeting, probably half of us are going to be there anyway.
The
So
idea, well, we shifted our schedule at the last meeting so that we wouldn't keep falling right after executive committee. With CARES Act, that wasn't an issue. So then I set the schedule that way. But then with talking to state's attorney's office, we need to vote on things, send it to executive and then the full board. So that's why we shifted the schedule.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a special meeting next week would be so that we could get on that executive agenda.
yeah, that's fine. And I just had a question. I know it's a very, very unique service, the consulting firm that we're having. How many firms did we have multiple firms interested
Yeah,
in
there were
this?
5.
There was 5, and we'll be deciding that on Tuesday.
Yeah,
Thanks.
What-
Okay.
ideally.
What time do you anticipate for this meeting?
I mean, there's no other standing committee meetings and anything on the calendar, so we could do 9 o'clock if that works for everyone.
That would work for me.
I don't know, anyone online, Ms. Molina, Ms. Strathman, if you have any objections. to
9
that
a.m.
time.
works for me, Mr. Chair. Strathman?
Okay,
Question, Mr. Chairman, Shepro.
Shepro?
I would hope that perhaps the Ernst & Young people could be available at that meeting also, because now we'll have had a chance to review the final documents, hopefully.
That's dependent on their schedule and ability to attend, if you guys are able to.
I mean,
Obviously, the
at a bare
invitation.
minimum, I think being able to be virtual is
Yeah,
is fine. I don't
yeah,
have my
yeah, yeah.
Calendar's available, but I think
Yeah.
we could do that certainly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you.
And before we move on, Gary, in terms of if we engage your services, who will be our point person that that our program manager will be working with primarily? Would that be you?
So I'll be overall responsible for the engagement.
Okay,
And then we'll have another gentleman, I believe, we're still assembling the core team based on your needs.
Yeah.
That will be the kind of the point person to run the day to day.
I forgot to ask that at the beginning, just for context, so everyone understands that Gary is actually going to be the person that we work most closely with at Ernst & Young. Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for your questions and comments today.
Thank you
in the
so much.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
All right, thank you. Okay. Resolution establishing parameters for the Community Support Grant Program. If I could have a motion and a second to discuss, pass this.
So move.
Mr. Froz moves.
Comes a second.
Seconds. So you have before you a boilerplate resolution. All it needs is to be populated by our recommendations, our considerations for the criteria. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I worked with some others to at least determine a starting point for us to have our conversation. So a framework that we can use to begin. Okay. So that is the original concept that we've come up with. I forgot how this works. Sorry. I'm still new to PowerPoint. So this concept, it breaks down into a few different categories because we have mental health, behavioral and mental health, homeless shelters, and food pantries. But with the behavioral and mental health, the idea being there are a few big players, not players, but there are a few big organizations that really cover a wide net in the county for covering mental health services. So having a larger allocation for those organizations was an idea that came about. And I asked Michael Isaacson to be here today to kind of go over this with us. So Michael, if you could approach the podium and just kind of discuss this concept, because looking at this chart, I just want you all to understand this is changed at the will of your word. So this is just an initial recommendation that we want you to consider, and then we'll go from there. So Michael, if you could introduce us to this idea.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. I'll be brief with my comments. I did put together just one slide just to provide a brief overview, but just quickly, and I think you have heard a lot about this, and you certainly heard from our community partners in the listening sessions. Over the past 10 or 15 years, I've continued to hear more and more about the impact of mental health on our communities. When we did our comprehensive community health assessment 3 years ago, mental health was identified as the #1 issue impacting our residents in terms of scope and severity. Next slide, please, Blake. So this is something that's been identified as a need. So that was 3 years ago. In our most recent assessment that we did, this is a comprehensive process where we engage our hospitals, providers, social service organizations. Again, mental health was identified as #1. So behavioral health is an issue that's been getting worse in our community. COVID put tremendous additional pressures on our families. So not only with isolation, with job loss, with fear, we have seen an increase in suicides. So we had a doubling of people who were under 30 years old who killed themselves from 2019 to 2020. We've seen a 13% increase in fatal opioid overdoses from 2019 to 2020, and we're still looking at the 2021 data as we move through the year, but it's not looking good in either case there. We continue to see more families and more need. Our schools are continuing to report to us. I just met with one of our school districts yesterday that said they will send a student to the hospital only to find out that it's going to be 6, 8, 10 weeks before that person is able to get into the help that they need. So they come back to school without getting the help they need. They may be stabilized in the moment in the hospital. And I think Ms. May did a nice job talking about some of the really horrific things just in 1 week that's impacting our residents here in the community. So we have opportunity with these funds, and we do have an internal request in to make some transformative longer term changes in the community. But we've gone through 2 mechanisms to identify our more immediate needs. So through our community health assessment and subsequent community health improvement planning process, we formed a behavioral health council. And actually, Ms. May is co-chair for that group right now. We have surveyed and worked in conversation with all of those people to identify our immediate needs and what's happening as a result of COVID. Additionally, as Chairman Sanchez has pointed out, we've worked with our community mental health centers, our 4 community mental health centers here in King County, and our core substance use treatment providers to really dig in and identify what are the needs. And you've heard it over and over, staffing is the immediate need. So there's some things that we can do that will really transform how we address mental health in this community. Those are longer term interventions, but in the short term, we have hundreds of families who are on waiting lists, some who are in acute crisis right now that can't get the help they need. And our mental health providers, our substance use treatment centers are not able to hire and they're not able to retain. So certainly this is an issue that goes across many sectors in our community right now. We're dealing with this, but here in the realm of behavioral health, this is a crisis, and our King County families are really, really struggling. So we've worked with 6 core groups, and I think this is a really important thing to point out. Every organization can come and ask for money. That's easy. What we've done is we've convened people and we've said, okay, we want you to give up a little bit of autonomy and be willing to join in a more collaborative effort, even though everybody is competing for the same employees. They're trying not to lose people. And these 6 organizations have all agreed that, yes, we're willing to give up just fighting for our own dollars just individually. And I mean, they're their own organizations, so they certainly still have the right to continue to advocate for themselves. But they're willing to participate in this as a collective to best serve the needs of our King County residents. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. The community mental health centers in King County, if you're not aware, it's AID that provides a lot of services, Family Service Association, Family Counseling Services, and Tri-City Family Health in Geneva. Those are our 4 community-based mental health centers. And then we've also been working with Mutual Ground, which has absorbed Breaking Free, and also the Ecker Center up on the northern end of the county.
Mr. Frost, he had his hand up first, can you?
One of my concerns, I know Madam Chairman had touched on this briefly, but for example, today we heard testimony about the hotline and manning the hotline, staffing it. I know some of those people are volunteers, some aren't. And in previous testimony, one of the agencies said, well, we would hire a doctor. We've always needed to do that. And I guess my concern is, that takes care of funding staffing for a year or whatever. So I just don't want everybody to go out and hire a bunch of people and then come back to us next year and say, hey, you got to be our perpetual source of funding.
Absolutely.
So everybody has to realize that this is a one-off deal.
And I think that, in my personal opinion, that puts the onus on the county where we have an immediate need that we need to hire people right now. But to your point, if this is a Band-Aid and 3 years from now, we have nothing to show for it, then we haven't spent this money well. So we need to invest right now to get some people on board, to keep people from leaving to the private sector where they can potentially make more money, potentially have easier, not easy by any means, but potentially not doing home visits and things like that. But with the internal request, I think that's where we get into, and actually we had some discussion even at Public Health Committee. How do we work with our colleges to increase that pipeline, to bring more people in? How do we utilize higher education to have a more robust internship program that the county is helping to shore up, so that it's not just dependent on this funding now, it's not just dependent on the funding over the next few years, but really we can invest and then have something 5 years from now, 6 years from now. I 100% agree with you, sir.
Yeah, I know, as we review this, I'll be looking at solving this whole pot of money was for solving short-term immediate needs related to COVID. And the assumption is that will go away. Mental health issues won't go away, but the surge will. So I think we have to look at surge needs rather than long-term systemic needs.
Right. So on this chart, this is surge needs. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Kenyon?
I think you answered the question from talking before. You can't hire the people. Okay, you got the money, but you can't hire the qualified people to answer the needs. So somehow we have to train people to work with you and everybody else. So that, to me, might be the main goal, is with these community colleges to attach a program. And I heard something on the radio with more women are going out of the workforce because they can't get somebody to take care of their children.
Yep.
And that's a simple thing. Haha.
Yep.
Train people to work in daycare.
Absolutely.
So this is probably one of the problems.
Mhm.
We need to train people to solve these problems.
And Michael, before I entertain another question, correct me if I'm wrong. When we've talked about when it comes to this money, it's more about retention and sign-on bonuses rather than create a new position that requires a year of funding.
Right, absolutely. And it's a bridge between, I think, what both of these gentlemen are saying is we have immediate needs now where we need to change the way we're doing recruiting. We need to keep people who are already in these positions from leaving. Ms. May talked about only being at 2/3 staffing for one shift. If one of those people leaves because they can go and take a private sector job and make better money, and it's different work where they're not scrambling around, because that's hard work that these people are doing, going to crisis calls day after day. So we have an immediate need, but then there's a lot of opportunity for us to build. And I think Kane County is perfectly positioned where we can be a magnet to bring people and to retain people. So we can have our younger people come up, but we have this perfect mix of urban and rural, and we have all kinds of things that I think are appealing to people. To Ms. Bates' points about this is youth. You may have seen that the American Academy of Pediatrics just named mental health of our children a crisis right now. We have disparities by race, by income. So I think for the ARPA funds, this is a perfect opportunity to invest, but it has to be an investment. There has to be a long-term goal where we can come out ahead. Absolutely.
Mr. Tepe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to share with everybody here that I really believe the health department has a tremendous handle on the organizations that provide services here in the county. And Mr. Isaacson in particular runs a meeting which he holds typically every 2 months, but sometimes every month, where virtually all of these organizations participate in the meeting. And as he said, Ms. May is vice chair of that particular organization. But they have created a relationship, and he has an interesting relationship with them where to some extent you might say he's been herding cats, okay? But he understands, and the health department understands where this money should go. And they should be a big part of determining the allocation associated with the mental health. Okay. I do have a problem with the lower two buckets of that particular slide. So if we can talk about those separately, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. And so the original concept came about in discussion with the health department that to be more transformative with the money and get the most return on investment, this is a good idea, at least, to get us in that direction. But I also wanted to open it up to some of the other organizations out there in the mental health field. So that's why we wanted to have something for that as well.
Well, I have a problem with a limit of $30,000, you know.
Yeah, this is just an initial start, so.
I understand, but
Get to figure
But
it
it-
out.
it's going to say, you know, why should we have a limit there? If they've got justification for whatever amount that they have, then it should be considered.
Ms. Bates?
I've got a couple things, couple comments. The one about, what if we pay for, I forget who needed to hire a doctor, and we're only giving them the money for 1 year. I asked this question at the listening session with the food pantries, and Shannon Cameron from the Aurora Food Pantry jumped up and said, if you give us the money to hire somebody for 1 year, we can gather the data, get the evidence, do evidence-based research on what benefits this position did for our organization. And we can go out to our next grant writer, our next foundation, and say, this is the good that it did. And with evidence, we can go and say, please fund this position. Marie Wilkinson Food Pantry, they're desperate for a manager for their warehouse. If we could fund that for 1 year, maybe they could show that they increased their client services by 50% or 100%. I want to say one more thing, and that's about not being able to find the people you need. And I want to say that Madam Chair came up with a brilliant idea a couple days ago, which was, if we've got the money in the budget, maybe this wouldn't apply to nonprofits, but for us, if we have the money in the budget to hire people, we can't hire them. Let's put some money towards their education on bringing them in to qualify.
And
Right?
I-
Is that what you said?
I, well, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. Let me give you a little background. I have a very dear friend who has a son who has autism. The son is grown up. When I first met the family, the son was in high school and now quite a handsome, very big young man, 6'2". The father, in the meanwhile, is aging in place, as so is the mother. Their issue is that right now they live in Schaumburg. They have no one to care for their children. And they can't find a placement for this child because there is no staff. So he reached out to me and said, could we encourage our students, high school students, to do an internship, or our junior college students? And I thought, well, let's take that one step further. And listening to the conversation, it was simply a matter of putting two and two together. That I am concerned truly, that right now we know that a number of people across the country are taking a look at their career goals and their opportunities. It's not just money. It's about what they want to do with their lives. And COVID has caused this. I'm not sure why. I've always worked really hard. I'm happy to have a job, but other people seem to have the ability to make other choices, and that's fine. It's their choice. If we give people money here to support our not-for-profits, and we can use the doctor, I'm always trying to be the optimist, hopeful, but I'll be a pessimist on this. I wouldn't take a job if I knew it was going to be funded for 1 year because of the time, energy, and effort to get myself acclimated to that position, knowing that there was some guarantees as an employee that I was going to have a future with that organization, unless I knew I was coming in as I had been previously as a consultant, knowing that the contract was going to be limited. That is a real concern to me. So talking to HR and listening to our other issues about tuition reimbursement, could we allocate funds through a tuition program where we could help pay for a student's education, but in the meanwhile, they're working here either 2/3 time, half time, going to school, earning their income from Kane County, but also helping to support their education. And by the time they're done with that 2-year degree or certificate, whatever is required, they sign paperwork that either if they decide to leave for another opportunity, they have to pay us back, or they continue to work here for whatever that contract may be, another 2 years, 3 years, whatever is agreed upon. That way it would encourage our students to, and our employees perhaps, to continue their training, their education. And we have guarantees that they will be with us, hopefully for a while, to develop a career within the county.
Would they be working in the health department? Is that what you're?
They could possibly work for Jody Walnick. They could work for Scott Berger. You know, there could be different departments that they could work in that require a certain amount of training, transportation.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. A little outside of the scope of this program, I think, but something that we should be looking at as part of the overall ARPA picture. I'd like to come back to this. You got these figures in your head. Let's go over some of the eligibility criteria, which is the real meat of this, because that then may help inform the amounts that we want to have in this chart. So the first one, it's not working. All right, froze up on me. So these are the applicant eligibility, as you'll see in the resolution. That's the first section in the supplement. Basically, before we even determine, what it can be used for, who can apply. 501(c)(3) nonprofit is it's an easy answer, but there has been some discussion that maybe we would miss some organizations that don't qualify under that umbrella. So really, it's a matter of, does the committee want to just keep it to nonprofits, to 501(c)(3) organizations? Is there anybody who would object to keeping it to nonprofits?
No.
No.
All right. So then the other thing, in operation by date, and this comes from the last year's CARES Act when we did small business grants. We wanted to know that they were in operation because some were closed and we didn't want to give money out, as you might remember, if they were still closed. Is this something you guys want to consider? Like they have to have already been in operation at the early part of this year or something like that,
Oh, yes, yes.
at least?
Yes. Oh,
Not in
yes.
operation for 2 years.
I'd like them to have been in existence before this crisis began.
I would say 5 years.
Yeah, the 5 years would strike me too. It's arbitrary, but it gives evidence of the fact that they have put something together and might have a legitimate problem caused by COVID and not just startup issues.
2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, five
4 years.
seems excessive.
Yeah, because we might miss
Somebody
some
might have been 2
organizations.
years in when COVID hit.
Something to keep in mind too, this isn't necessarily, have you witnessed impacts of COVID? They all have. This is a way to address a problem that we already know without even having to prove it with evidence that it is exacerbated by COVID. Mr. Martin.
5 may sound excessive, but I watched these things come and go over the years.
Mhm.
People get ideas, they qualify, you can get a provisional 501(c)(3) status, and then they don't put it together. And I think a 5-year limit means that we have an organization that in fact has a structure
Mhm.
and an existing donor.
And a strong board.
An existing donor. I mean, we're supposed to be dealing with problems caused by COVID, which means that they should have had a structure in place that enabled them to get where they wanted to be without us, but for the COVID. So I think the 5 years is I would agree with the chairman.
Is there anyone who would suggest a different number? Ms. Bates?
I can't give you any examples, Mr. Martin, but I think that especially in my community of Aurora, there were organizations, very worthy organizations that have sprung up within the last couple of years that I would like to give them the chance to be considered. So I think 2 years might be a better number. And some organizations may have sprung up particularly with respect to COVID and might be doing a good job. So they might only be 1 year. So I think the 5 years is too arbitrary.
I can think of an example of a food pantry that came into existence up by me 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
So it wouldn't qualify, but they need help. Just as an example.
How about 3 years instead of 5 or 2?
Oh, my gosh.
Do I hear 2.5?
No.
Mr. Chair Gums.
Gums, go ahead.
Listen, I understand the numbers that are flying out here as far as the years go, but I would hate for somebody to have created their business just prior to our pandemic with the hopes of being extremely successful. And due to the pandemic, we're not successful. I certainly think they ought to be considered because were it not for the pandemic, may have done a great thing. So I would submit to you that it should be just prior to the onset of the pandemic and no further out from that.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, I'm making all sorts of faces here. So you can see I'm a little antsy about this for the right reason. Certainly in support of our startup not-for-profits. But if we're looking at eligibility, perhaps we can use best practices from a bank. If I were to take out a loan for my business, how long do I have to be in business before I'm eligible for that loan? It's not certainly in the first year. In the first year of your business, you have to have enough capital to be able to survive. Most of the time, they're going to look at you for another 2 years. Do you have enough capital to survive, to start your business? Because they know that most businesses are going to fail within the first year. Second year is a little bit more trying. These are charitable organizations, but I would like to remind everyone that this is a not-for-profit corporation. It is a business. The only difference between that business and a private business is that all money goes back into programming. It doesn't go to the shareholders. It takes several years to be able to develop a strong board, and the board is the breath and the life of that organization. And you're right, for funding, not just a funder, because you don't want to have a funder. You want to have a community funder, because if that one funder goes away, so does your organization. You have to be based into the community. You have to be able to get adequate support to be able to fund that. So I think longevity, especially with the organizations that have been brought forward to our attention recently, these are long sustained organizations within the county. And I would like to give them the opportunity, who have proven themselves over the test of time and duress, to be able to have application for this money.
Well, and do we have audit responsibilities? I mean, the other reason I'd want to have people with experience is that I'm going to assume that we bear responsibility for their proper handling of the money.
Mhm.
And if I have to sit and gamble on one of these 4 entities that Michael mentioned, I'm totally comfortable. And everybody else might be well-intentioned or whatever else, but with no track record, I don't know that we're meeting a fiduciary responsibility to make certain that the money goes where it might be the most secure.
And that is something the consultant firm will need to help us in establishing what kind of reporting, what kind of documentation is required, so we don't fall into that trap, because we can't hand out money and then end up having to pay it back. They'll be responsible first, but ultimately we are responsible. Mr. Frost?
So as far as this, we're talking about years, but we have to have a start date, which I assume, what was the official start of COVID? Was it May 20? Whatever that date. So I mean, we have to say been in existence X number of years prior to say
So,
May.
okay, I'm going to suggest something as a starting point, and then if anyone would like to motion to amend, we'll go from there. I think that'll be the cleanest way to do it. So I'm going to say, we'll start with the idea that they had to have been in operation by 2019. So they were in 2019, they've had some time to prove the concept, or they've already been well established by that point. I would imagine that our consultant firm would have some very solid ways for us to determine if this organization is viable or if they're risky. That's something that was talked about in our interview with them, is risk assessments for applicants. If they look at the group and say, yeah, they're not handling their money very well, that's on us to then turn around and say, no, we're not going to grant that allocation to you. So I'll start with, has to be in existence in 2019, or we could even pick January of 2019. And if anyone would like to make a motion to amend that.
I would agree with that. Fry speaking, I would agree with that. And keep in mind that we still have the discretion. If something looks shaky to us,
Yes,
we have the discretion on every one of these grants to say no for whatever reason.
yes.
Good point.
Would anybody like to move to amend January
So that's about
2019?
2 years and 3/4.
Yeah,
Okay. Right.
so, okay. Hearing no opposition, then we'll have the,
Well, aren't you going to
You have
vote on
a
it?
motion and
What's
a
that?
second?
You have a motion and a second. Should you vote?
well, this is just us in conversation,
Okay.
establishing these criteria, and
Alright.
then we'll vote on the whole thing together.
Okay.
You understand? So
Alright.
that's
That's
why, because there's a lot of different ideas on this point, I just phrase it that way. Let's have this as a January 2019 as a starting point. Anyone want to move to amend as an organized way to come to a consensus as a committee? Okay,
Register me as an objection.
okay.
I mean, if you're looking for a consensus, if that's what it is, I feel strongly about the 5 years.
You want to just move to amend that then and let everyone vote on up or down?
Well, that's
on
what
that?
I just asked. Are we voting on these things or what are we doing?
Well, it's not like a formal resolution vote. It's just an informal amongst the committee. I can have everyone raise their hands.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to register the thought. I thought it was originally, I thought it was a motion to amend.
Right, that's how I
We're
phrased it.
amending if it's,
The starting point would be January of 2019, if anyone would like to change that and let the committee, we can call the roll. If we want to go to 5 years, if you want to move for 5 years, then,
well,
okay, let's
I'd
have that.
I'd like 5 years.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I'm going to jump in on this. I would agree with Ms. Bates. I certainly understand what you're saying, that, somebody maybe could have been in business because of COVID. Now they're suffering this hardship. But yet, knowing what I know from sitting in on the interviews and such, that the Treasury is going to be very specific on what this money is being spent for. And Mr. Martin brought up a good point about how that organization has to have the reputation of doing the right thing with the money and spending it in the right place and being audited and so on and so forth. I think 5 years is a more appropriate answer. So I would make a recommendation to amend your motion to January of 2017.
okay, so we have 2 votes for 5 years. Mr. Kenyon? So you're saying no to 5 years? We
I
can,
said 3 votes.
okay. Oh, are you a third?
Yes.
You're for 2017?
Mr. Frost?
I just don't want to be sitting here a few months from now, listening to somebody that poured their heart into building an organization for 2 years. And it was really successful and they're helping the community and they fall outside of our guidelines. So I'm in agreement with the chairman's recommendation.
Okay, so you'd be a no on 5 years. Ms. Bates?
No on 5 years. Yes on what my colleague to my left said.
Mr. Tepe?
I agree with Mr. Froz.
So you're a no on 5 years?
Yeah, 3 years.
Tiebreaker, man.
Well, we have Ms. Strathman on the line.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am not in support of 5 years. I would consider it 3 years
Okay,
or 2 years, 2 years even, but not, I think 5 years is too long.
okay, thank you, Ms. Strathman. Ms. Gums?
I'm a no on the 5 years. I like the 19.
Ms. Molina?
Yes, I prefer a 2 or 1.5 years. I'm not sure what the purpose of it exactly is, to wait to make something 5 years, but no, I'm against 5 years.
Okay. Is there another number anyone would like to recommend at this point?
Are we
Outside of
at 2 years?
We're at
possibly?
January 2019, and we're seeing if the committee wants to move in a different direction.
January 2019 is about 2 2/3 years.
Almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years, yeah.
So just for clarification, and perhaps I know we have people here in the audience who are not-for-profit experts right now. And I'm trying to look up quickly. For our attorneys who are sitting here for advice. I start a not-for-profit and I get together a board, I'm hypothetical right now. And none of that money is tax deductible because it's just a grant in, but I've decided that I'm going to call myself not-for-profit A. So I have $100,000 that my friends and neighbors have given to me. None of it's tax deductible right now. Is that the start of your business, or are you going to look at incorporation? And once the incorporation starts, doesn't it take about a year to get it through? So is that the date we're looking at? You're being incorporated within 1 year is your startup, just you're gathering your program together. We're looking at the date of incorporation. So is that incorporation going to be the 2019 date, or are you considering the organizations who are community-based, who are getting private funding, who are not necessarily, have just recently become incorporated? I think that's going to be pretty specific. So
I think in operation by is sort of the key term. They have to be providing the services.
but they could do it without having that 501c3 status.
Right, and that's
The
okay.
status, you can get provisional status by filing a form that promises to do certain things. And then that status becomes final at a point in time when you can file tax returns and give verification that in fact you have met the exempt purpose. So you could have formed a corporation that you call not-for-profit, and 2 years later, find out that it in fact is not for profit.
So then maybe we would want it to be that they have to have that, not a provisional status, but an actual status as a 501. I don't know what the right term of that is, but a final award of that nonprofit status. Would that probably be more appropriate?
Absolutely, because it all goes back to the same thing. We have to undergo an audit. And if we pick somebody that's been open is filed one tax return, they've got a provisional thing, and we don't have any assurance in a final certificate of their 501c3 status that in fact they qualify. That's, and I don't, the consensus was not that 5 years was too long, but there has to be a history before they can get their final status. Michael, what do you know?
Sure. So and I've started 501c3s and I'm on boards and things. And I think one happy medium that we've used in funding in the past is to Mr. Frauz's point, maybe you keep the shorter, and then in your evaluation, you can look at how long an organization's been here. So as Mr. Frauz said, you're not excluding somebody because they've only been around for 3 years. But if somebody's been around for 50 years, you may feel more comfortable funding them, and that can be part of your criteria. So it's kind of a happy medium where you're not shutting people out, but you're still weighing the point that, hey, there is accountability. So having a track record matters.
So we're not
So you're
closing the
saying not
door.
including provisional status?
I agree with Mr. Martin. I think having your I can go incorporate right now. I just have to send the state a check. That doesn't mean anything, but I think getting your 501c3 status.
So
is
I don't know
good.
the proper term, but not being in a provisional status, being in an actual determined 501c3 would be an appropriate.
Right, it has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be.
What did we say? Final for 2 years? Is that the 2 years that we're talking about then?
We're at 2 years, right?
What's that? They would have to have had the status by January 19. So then they have.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I keep thinking about equity in this situation, because if we look at our big four, they're established. They need our money, but they'll succeed with, they'll keep going. We know that they will figure out how to survive. There are small groups being created by people of color in small ways that I really feel like they deserve a chance to apply for this grant as much as the biggies. It's a matter of fairness to me.
I think what we're really considering today is a way to get some money out in the short term, give us time to work our plan, and then look at what other funding opportunities do we want to create for these kinds of services in the future. So I think, and from what I'm hearing from the committee, I should say, is we have to be cautious, and having these grants only go to established nonprofits is a very safe route to go at this point in time, but it doesn't preclude us coming back later and saying, okay, now we'll open up perhaps another program for all types of entities that have a status. You know, this is something we have to consider in the long term, but I think in the short term, what I'm hearing is we want to have some security.
Can I?
Mr. Martin.
Not to dominate it unfairly, I hope. The other thing is, our consultants alluded to the fact, our prospective consultants alluded to the fact that small increments become very expensive and not to administer, which means the guidance we're going to receive is going to be, it's a lot better to pass somebody $500,000 than to pass them 5,000. Well, if we deal with organizations that have substance and time, we're going to be a heck of a lot more comfortable giving them $500,000. And we avoid that risk of the small amounts. I mean, I understand, Mavis, everything you're saying, but I think we're going to have, I think we need to be judicious on how we do this, and just giving people a chance. I get
There
a
are other
little
grants.
skittish about.
There are other grants. I don't mean to interrupt. Could we do it on the basis, following Mr. Martin's conversation, is not only 501c3 status, but also on budget? And I know oftentimes grants require that you have a certain allocation, an annual budget, because that again shows progress, stability, being able to access funds, be able to have programs in place. So are we looking at, I mean, some of these smaller community-based organizations may have a budget of $5,000. Not saying they're not doing good work, but $5,000. So what are we going to be giving them? 100% of their funding? $5,000? Are we going to be looking at more substantive grants, to the point that was talking about before with Mr. Isaacson, that we would be giving grants of $100,000, $300,000 to organizations? And I believe in the document that was given to us by Ernst & Young, it says here very, very clearly, if I can find it, it does say in here, no small grants. That the small micro grants would not be allocated through them because of that cost. So we're looking at, I think the average compensation, hourly compensation for Ernst & Young was $200+ an hour. If we're looking at having them allocate grants and approve that through the process that are $3,000, $1,500, we're really not doing that organization a service, because we're reducing the amount of money that's going to be available to give to our not-for-profit grants by having Ernst & Young take a look at the program and making sure that it meets all the criteria.
So,
Mr. Brown.
So bottom line, what you're saying, Madam Chair, is if we fund a $500,000 grant to a larger organization, because of the cost to administer it, more money is going to be going out to the community where it needs to be than if we fund a whole bunch of $5,000 grants.
Yes.
That's bottom
But,
line. Yeah.
but that $500,000 that is given to organization A is going to go out into the community.
Right.
They're going to
Because
directly fund.
Every application and every grant that we put out there is going to require administration, and it's going to require administration for 5 years, right?
Correct.
With all the reporting that has to go on. So it's going to cost money. Every application, every grant's going to cost money for the next 5 years. And that money is going to be going to our program manager and our consultant. So that's money that's not going to the community. So the the lesser amount of grants that we have is the more money that's going directly into the community, in my way of thinking.
It's a math equation.
Mr. Frost?
I just can't, I know we got our big organizations and they do wonderful things and I want to give them a lot of money. But I also think when you zero it down to the neighborhood level, I mean, I know, for example, there's a food bank in Elburn and it's manned by volunteers and, getting $5,000 or $10,000 would be a godsend to them. So I just, I really don't want to alienate or eliminate a huge chunk of these organizations. But by saying we're only going to deal with the big boys.
But to that point, I'm not saying that these smaller organizations aren't entitled to some help, but it could be administered through the larger organizations. Am I right with that, Michael?
I
No.
don't think you said
so-
that.
No, we can't do that.
So if we give $1 million to AID, we can assume that they're going to reach out to all these other
No, I'm
organizations.
speaking more if it goes through the health department. If the health department administers how that money is distributed to these different organizations. Am I correct with that or am I off base on that?
That is something we could do. I don't know that that's really within the scope of this program. Because at least the conversation I recall us having is this is something to open up to the community. We do have some more long-range plans in the departmental requests that will help set up the health department as an entity that can distribute funds in that manner.
Okay, but I guess speaking to the food pantries, you bring
Like an
up a
Illinois
very
Food
good
Bank.
point. If the money then goes to the Northern Illinois Food Bank, then that gets distributed to all those smaller food pantries.
Mhm.
Correct. That food product can go there and that could be direct opportunity through that grant application. That we would set up the criteria if you wanted a larger grant, that has got to have impact to other organizations who are like-minded organizations that they serve.
Right.
Mr. Martin.
Just to be practical about it, distributing $4 million in $5,000 increments is like painting a house with a 2-inch brush. I mean, it'll take forever. This committee will go nuts sitting here with lines of people coming for $5,000 requests. We need, if we're going to recognize that it's an emergency, we need to recognize that there are entities that have a superstructure that's established that they can in fact utilize the money and get it out there. But if we're going to sit and have a line out to the parking lot of people looking for $5,000 bequests, donations, we'll go nuts.
Well, I think having that in operation by January 2019 at least gives us a good head of that so that we know the people applying will have some proof of concept under their belt. And of course, our consultant firm will need to establish the exact documentation required that will give them and us the level of confidence that it's a safe grant award, that we're not going to end up having to pay it back because the organization is risky. So I don't envision there's going to be a long line of $5,000 requests. I think, the money, whatever amount we select for the smaller mental health organizations will be absorbed pretty well and quickly. But let's try and stay on the topic here because we just want to at least who comes through the gate first. What are those parameters? So then we can look at what things will be eligible for funding. So is it related to this, Ms. Bates?
Yes, it is. I would like to say that $5,000 grants is an exaggeration. We could do $20,000 grants. We could do $50,000 grants. It's not going to be a line out the door. And even if it is, and I don't want to do $5,000 grants. I agree that would be a waste of it would be too expensive to do that. But in terms of giving out money to new organizations that look like they're doing great work, maybe we won't be very comfortable with some of those, but I don't think our job is to be comfortable. I think our job is to, take the risks, do the vetting and find out what are the best organizations.
Mr. Frost.
Comment and And point of order. My comment is that, we have 24 board members and a chairman who are all going to be getting phone calls from their local, we're the local representatives. And I don't want to be answering the phone telling people that they don't qualify. With that said, I think we just went through the process of taking a consensus to stipulate that you have to have a valid 501c3 by January of 2019. So I don't know why.
Okay, let's go with that.
Well,
So
I'm just pointing out that we've already done the exercise.
Yeah. So other considerations here, they must provide services in Kane County in these categories. I think that's kind of an obvious no-brainer one, but we have to go through these. And that they also be in good standing with all applicable federal, state, and local standards and requirements. So this is just who can at least apply, not to say they will get an award, but they have to at least meet these criteria. So to just reiterate, they have to be incorporated as a 501c3 officially, not provisionally. They have to be in operation by January 2019. They must provide services in Kane County and be in good standing with all federal, state, and local standards and requirements. That sound right to everyone? Is there any objections to that or any additions? Okay, so we will move on to the eligibility criteria. So here, there's a lot here, but it's pretty simple. The first one, mental health services, they have to be providing mental health services. Expenses related to the operation of homeless shelters, including the housing of individuals in hotel rooms is overflow relief. That's something we heard as a need in our listening sessions. Expenses related to the operation of food pantries. So those top three right there just have to do with regular operating expenses of these organizations. Further down, this comes a little bit more from the small grant program we did last year, rent and mortgage payments for the place of business. This is an allowable use for nonprofits. Equipment integral to the organization's operations, provided that the facility or the equipment was secured by the organization after, and we can select a certain date if this is something we want to include. Utility costs, PPE, cleaning and disinfecting of the place of operation, and then costs of minor physical modifications to the place of business to comply with social distancing, not any other capital improvements, only social distancing. So I think the top three are pretty self-explanatory and obvious. I don't know if there's any additional kind of verbiage. This isn't the exact verbiage. Obviously, our legal team will make it more fleshed out and official. I just kind of paraphrased what is in the resolution for all of our consideration. Mental health services, as we talked about today, the sign-on and retention bonuses is really where the heart of the conversation seems to be for the majority of these organizations. We heard it one after another at the listening sessions. I hope all of you had a chance to review those, by the way. So if we need to be more specific in some way to say it's only going to be for staffing or not any other operational costs that they have, then now is the time for us to say that. Mr. Tepe.
One of the things that I thought was interesting from the food pantries, and I went and visited a couple of them, and they independently said that one of the things that an area that they wanted to work on was helping people get out of poverty, have them learn how to handle finances, have them learn how to properly prepare meals, how younger people in the family didn't know how to prepare meals, how to handle diabetic situations associated with food. And I thought in my mind, why the hell don't we do this for the county? I mean, why should each individual food pantry should do this? Why shouldn't we have something like this for the county? And to me, that's something that should be included in this, but is it not included under ARPA to help people?
The
get out of
county
poverty?
creating something, services like this?
Pardon?
You're saying the county creating services like this?
No, the county funding it so that there's one program and it would handle all the food pantries type thing.
Oh,
But
well,
so one food pantry could share with the others, okay? But is that something that, would make sense?
for this program, I'm not certain that it would make sense. This is more of a grant program. That sounds more like a
Yeah,
creating a
that's why I
program.
asked. That's why I
Yeah,
asked.
that's like a separate program that we could absolutely consider and I would support, by the way. But for this, it's what allowable expenses do we want to include as,
Okay,
as
I'll
part
shut
of this
up.
program? So with mental health, I think it really has to do with staffing and the sign-on retention bonuses. At least that's my understanding. Michael, you can correct me if there are some other really high priority uses of the money that these organizations have that you're aware
Those were
of.
identified as the top priority.
Okay. And whatever to help deliver their programs that they have in existence. So would we say existing programs, supporting existing programs, not creation of new? Or do we want to allow them to create new programs as well, knowing the money will run out?
I think creating new, as Fraz speaking, creating new programs is just too much of a long term.
Yeah.
As I've said before, this is a short term
Yep.
fix.
Okay.
But I'm
So,
happy with the 9 items up there. I can't read that. My eyes are so bad, but does that include the bonuses and retention? Or do we have to add that? There you go.
Yeah, so that's why I'm in conversation. We're getting those, the sign-on and retention bonuses seems to be the key. So I think if that's what we want to do, that's what would go into the
It
language
wouldn't
of
be
this
limited to that. It would be in addition to these 1 through 9.
If that's what we want to, the direction we want to go with these other ones. For homeless shelters and food pantries, again, it's just operational costs. So if food pantry has to buy food, homeless shelter, again, they may have to purchase hotel rooms. They need budgets for that, or they need money for that. There's a overflow in both homeless shelters and food pantries, as we heard from the listening sessions. So just basic operational costs seem to be an easy way to just handle those issues. Ms. Bates?
So I don't see where it says anything about bonuses. Is that just?
So in
Mike,
conversation,
please.
Thank you. I don't see anywhere in this list where it talks about bonuses, signing on or
Yeah, I
retention.
I
Is
should have
this
typed that in
implied?
there, but that will go in based on this conversation. The state's attorney is
Okay,
going to take
thank
all of
you.
our recommendations and put those into the
Okay.
resolution that goes to executive.
Mr. Chair, I got a question.
Mr. Brown?
Where, and I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but where does an organization that doesn't have capital expense, let's say a church organization, St. Vincent de Paul, they operate out of churches and they help a lot of people with rent expenses, utility expenses, things like that, which obviously if they didn't have that help, that could turn into mental health issues, things like that. But how do they fall into all this?
You know, in looking through the interim final rule, there's not a lot of wiggle room for some of those other kinds of uses, capital expenses being one of them. There are a lot of groups out there providing those kinds of programs. If we want to include that into this, we can. If we want to say, you know, we'll support those kind of programs, but what we've been trying to keep it to is really just homeless shelters, food pantries, and then mental health service providers to keep it more simple. So otherwise it does kind of get us more into the weeds of all the other possible uses to spend this money, possible ways to spend this money. And I apologize, this meeting is going long, but it's a lot to go through, so.
Yeah, we
it's
probably
not
ought to
easy
try to
sit
wrap
there.
it up. We're not going to have anybody here to vote.
The
on
good
it.
news
No.
is I started
need 2
a
votes.
not-for-profit at the beginning of the meeting and now we're eligible. So that's the good thing.
Yeah. So,
Good one, Michael.
Thank you.
so yeah, just expenses related to food pantry operation and homeless shelter operation, mental health services, sign-on bonus, retention bonuses. And then, okay, do we want to allow for rent and mortgage payments for these organizations as a way to help offset their costs?
Yeah, Fraz speaking, I would say yes, but I'm just trying to think if we should have a criteria. I mean, some people weren't able to pay their rent because their revenues dropped.
Mhm.
So I would hope that they would be able to prove that it was revenue loss during the COVID months, or revenue loss causing the rent to not be paid or so forth, not just, we're going to just pay our future rent.
Okay, so if they have back rent,
Yeah,
it can only go to March 3rd of this year. So we can't pay for anything that happened before that.
Okay, so it's the criteria of the program covers that.
Okay, so would anybody object to including rent / mortgage payments for their place of business or operation going back to March 3rd, if they can show that they weren't able to make their rent or mortgage payments?
No problem.
Okay. Okay, Equipment integral to the organization's operations. I don't know how much this would even come up. I know food pantries have mentioned vans. I don't know that that's something that state's attorney might be able to, Vince, on the operational, the equipment for organizations' operations. Can you speak to that and the kind of eligibility and what that could be?
So obviously it would depend on what exactly they're going to be using the money for, but generally speaking, if it's going to go to funding the service of a food pantry and it's something that is needed, I think that would be something that'd be covered under ARP. If that's generally what the question you're asking is, I would say yes, but again, we would like to know more specific.
Of course, it would have to be
Like a
vetted.
freezer?
Yeah. I mean, if that goes to the general, like for food pantries, obviously a freezer is integral to keeping, food for people to distribute that to the community. So yeah, that would be something that would be covered. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Bates, quickly.
so coming back to the Aurora Food Pantry, like. I
Use your mic.
Mike.
Hi, please. Oh, sorry. Coming back to food pantries and expenses related to the operation of food pantries. I'm going to bring up the leaky roof they have. Is there
That's not,
anything in
no,
here?
we can't.
It's still no.
The capital
Okay.
costs are not, as far as I've seen and the state's attorney has seen, are not included
Okay.
as an eligible expense.
All
Maybe
right.
we could provide the pans to collect the water at the bottom.
We could
They
provide
got
some
garbage
buckets, yes.
cans and-
So is there any objection to including equipment integral to an organization's operations?
No,
into our
that's fine.
criteria?
That sounds good.
And it would have to, there's an insert date here. It would only go back to March 3rd, 2021. Utility costs, is everyone okay with utility costs? Anyone who would like to take that off? Okay, the next few are COVID related directly, PPE, cleaning and disinfecting, and minor physical modifications to the place of operation. Does anyone want to remove any of those
It's good.
as eligible uses for these organizations? Okay. I would like to add that the funds be expended in a certain amount of time. This is meant to be a short-term grant program. Obviously, these funds have until 2026 to be spent. But in talking with some of you, I got the impression we don't want it just hanging out there. We want the money to get spent. So I'm going to at least start with that it has to be spent within 1 year of award date of award.
Okay.
Anyone would like to change that, expand it out to, 18 months or 2 years or 6 months, I don't know how long it will take some of these organizations to spend through the money, but it sounds like a year would probably be
2 years.
Okay, so Mr. Brown would
Mr.
like,
Chairman, Strathman here.
Mr. Rathman, go ahead.
Yeah, my thought might be that to give them the date of 1 year or with a reasonable explanation as to why not. There may be circumstances that we can't foresee at this point as to why they might not be able to spend the money in the given time. So maybe there could be some qualifying language that accompanies that.
Okay, well, Mr. Brown suggested 2 years. So I'll just go around and I'm seeing a few nods of the heads. Drew? You agree with 2 years?
I agree with 2 years. I was just thinking in terms of, if somebody orders a truck right now, it could be a year,
Yeah.
to get it.
Absolutely.
I'll go
Mr.
with
Tepe, you vote 2 years. Ms.
okay.
Bates?
2 is fine.
2, Mr. Brown, obviously.
These deadlines can really devastate a program if, like, the Future Energy Jobs Act said all construction of solar panels had to be done by December 31st, 2020, and boom, the pandemic happened, and so.
Mr. Rathman, would you vote yes or no for 2 years?
I would vote yes for 2 years.
Ms. Molina,
Yes, 2 years is fine.
Ms. Gums?
I would vote yes for Mr. Rathman's concept is great because somebody should always have the ability to, appeal for whatever the reason. I just think that might need to be included.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 2 years unless they can show
Okay,
explanation of the reason why.
Yeah,
That's
and then-
good.
And then
That's good.
we can
Yeah.
choose to allow that or not.
It'd be an extension,
okay.
request an
that's good.
extension.
Extension option.
All right, good.
Okay. So I think we've gone through everything. Now let's go back to the beginning. And of course, this freezes up again. I'll blame IT. So how much do we want to put in each category? We've gone through what we want to fund, what kind of organizations we want to allow in for consideration. Do we want to change these numbers up or down in any category? So it is where it's at right now. I'll just ask for someone, if anyone would like to make a change to this table.
Why do we need the second category?
Because that's for the smaller behavioral and mental health organizations, opening it up to the wide community as opposed to just a few organizations.
Was that Michael's suggestion?
It was a conversation.
Okay,
Multiple people.
I mean, to me, he's the guy who knows things.
Yeah, well, no, he helped us come up with what the needs are.
I'm not meaning to put you on the spot. I just didn't mean.
I'll take responsibility for the category 2.
Okay,
What's category 1 and 2 mean?
So 1 is what Mr. Isaacson detailed for us.
Of the big
This
ones.
concept of 6 organizations
Okay.
that have, they're the social safety net, long waiting lists. And they have all agreed together to share that allocation, whatever the amount is, and not compete with each other.
Are there 6 of them? How convenient. Somebody did the math. All right.
Debbie?
Yeah, I just don't like the limit of $30,000. I think that's too low.
For the other organizations?
Yeah, on that second line.
Okay, so what would you want to go up to?
Something higher.
Give me a number. Give me a number everyone can agree to or disagree to.
50?
50.
I'm thinking like 100, We again have to, go through the criteria and either approve it or not. So making it 30,000 to me is just too low. 100,000 would be probably high, but hopefully they would request something under that. Be my suggestion.
Going back to what was said earlier about the smaller grants are going to cost more money to administer.
Right.
Okay, so give me a number and we'll let everybody vote.
100,000.
100,000.
I like the 100,000.
I do too. Strathman here.
Roz?
Yep.
Bates?
Okay.
Brown?
So
I think Martin would say yes and Kenyon too.
That was too fast. We need to talk about it longer.
Yes, please. Okay,
On the
so,
other hand,
all right, so 100,000, do we want to keep that total allocation amount of 1 million? Do we want to adjust the mental health? There's $3 million going to mental health and $1 million going to homeless shelters and food pantries. Do we want to change that ratio? Does anybody want to move to or suggest that we change that ratio?
Which ratio? The million or the 750 and 250?
Well, any of them, but again, we
two
have,
versus
it's
the
mental
balance.
health is the $3 million piece of the pie. Homeless shelters and food pantries are the $1 million. Do we want to increase the amount for homeless shelters and food pantries is another way
I
to put
think
it.
that's
Yes.
okay for an original allocation, but I'm almost going back to Ms. Bates's earlier comment of a month or so ago where, we should be looking at $5, $6, $7, or $8 million. So key thing is that this is something we need to do fast. So
Would anyone move to change the total allocation numbers for any categories? Ms. Bates?
I think mental health is important, but my gosh, homelessness and food pantries, those people are just as important as mental health. So I'd like to make them even across that middle line.
$500,000 for each?
2 million above and 2 million below.
Oh, wow.
So is that your recommendation? 2 million
Yes.
homeless shelters and food pantries? Mr. Frost?
I kind of like the way the chart is.
Okay. Mr. Tepe, you already seem to indicate that you
I
disagree.
think the million for homeless shelters and food pantries, but I think the number should be $500,000 each. So that's a different subject.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. Mr. Brown?
I say leave it where it's at. As Ms. Bates has brought up many times, this is maybe the first round. This is just the first $4 million. This is going to give us a good taste of what the community is looking for out there. and what kind of need there is. We hear from everybody, mental health, mental health,
Health
mental
is
health.
number one. Okay,
So let's get going with this and we can always move from there.
okay.
I agree.
Right.
Bates, you're agreeing with that now?
I'll go with that.
Okay. All right, so then the total allocation amounts are unchanged. We increased the behavioral health and mental health section 2 up to $100,000. Now for homeless shelters and food pantries, does anyone want to suggest any changes to those numbers?
Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Gums?
So when it comes to the homeless shelters allocation, we're in a tricky time right now. Folks are under their forbearances are going to become expired. Evictions are going to go up, and this is the season for homelessness. It's cold out. I don't know that number is good enough for me. And when I think about the immediate need, I think that's going to be forefront as soon as the temperature comes down. Just thoughts on that. I don't know.
Okay.
Does anybody know how many homeless shelters we have? I mean, it's not something you see on every corner. So I mean, it's-
Ms. McNamee, can you come up to the podium? She's holding up some fingers. Multiple, not just a single finger.
All right, thank you for taking me up to the podium. We have 3 major homeless shelters within King County. You have Lazarus House, you have Hesed House, and you have Pads of Elgin. King County is a pretty large area. Right now, it's not just the eviction moratorium. You also have the stimulus checks are done, and then you have the cold weather on top of that. And you have most homeless shelters are full. So something's going to have to be done. So as far as I'm concerned, the number is way too low to start. And then capping it off at 150 is a drop in the bucket. I understand that you keep saying that this is 4 million and we're going to do something later. You can't guarantee me right now as a board that there will be more money later. And I think that if you gave the nonprofits that confirmation, that promise, yes, this is just 4 million right now, that might be a little bit easier. But quite frankly, you can't promise me that you're going to have this money again available at a larger, more substantial amount. And by the time you may come around to doing that, I mean, that homeless problem is going to be pretty huge.
I'm thinking, so then we really should up that 150 to 250.
Well, just
Or
doing the
3.
math, if there's only 3 shelters.
Yeah, or we could up it.
I had 5
divided
on my
by
list, so
3.
there's a couple maybe that you wouldn't consider as major homeless shelters. I don't have a list in front of me.
Right. There are some homeless shelters that are just overnight shelters. And I would never discount the work that they do. I know Helps does overnight, and that's all they do, but it is a very needed and necessary organization as well. So I'm just saying the 3 major, but there are other smaller organizations across King County that operate on a lower level, and they are very needed.
So the chart says up to, so if we raise that to either 250 or 3, one of those 3 big ones might be bigger than the other 2. So I would say raise that, it's up to, so let's raise it to up to 300,000, and the food pantries, whatever.
Yeah, and
up-
we
up
will
to-
we get overnight homeless shelters that apply. We have to go through and say, okay, yeah, you guys aren't going to spend $300,000.
Right.
But
So
maybe just 10,000 is good enough for your, we'll be able to assess that.
Yeah, so we're not worried about the low end, we're worried about the high end, and right now our high end isn't high enough, so it
Okay,
should be.
so you want to move it to 300?
I would move it to 300. That would give us flexibility if I don't know those facilities, but if one's much bigger than the others, we can give them a little bit more.
I think Hesed is the biggest one.
Okay, Mr. Tepe, would you agree with 300,000?
Well,
Up
I
to.
agree with the 300, but the problem is I also think the $750,000 is a challenge because we need more money for food pantries. So maybe the 4 million isn't enough.
Well,
I agree with
That's
that.
kind of already been determined. I
Yeah,
completely agree with you. I
So-
100% agree with you, but this is where we're at in time here. And we do have
this is
board
the
off
first,
authority for 4 million.
shot off the bat. This is, this is.
I know, but I don't want to get to the last item. First off, I completely agree with the $300,000. That's not an
That's where
argument.
we're at.
But I don't want to get to the last item and say, oh, we're out of money.
Well, that's why there's total allocations.
That's where we're going to be. Because the $250,000 for food pantry is just way
Okay,
too low.
we'll get to food pantries in a moment. So you agree with 300,000? Mavis, do you agree with 300,000?
Up
Up
to
to.
homeless shelters, up to 300,000. Sure, we can change it when we want to.
Okay. Mr. Brown? Ms. Strathman?
Yes. I
Ms.
agree.
Molina? Ms. Gums?
I agree with the up to, but I am with Mr. Tepe on the 750 is too low.
Yeah, that's what I
You
said
know, and
too.
I understand that you say this is where we're at in time, but where we're at in time is making other decisions as well. And I don't think 4 million's enough.
But we voted on that.
Yeah, I
and
know we
that's
did.
Decided by
Understood.
the full board. So 4 million is
Understood.
our cap. If we want to change these total allocation numbers though, as we did go
sorry
over
we
that a
did
few
that.
moments ago, but if somebody wants to reopen that part of the conversation and vote on a change in those numbers, that's fine. But for right now, we have 300,000 for homeless shelters, up to 300,000 for homeless shelters.
Sure, why not?
All right, and then food pantries, we have up to 15,000. Does anybody want to increase that number?
I have just a comment on that because I don't know if all of you have seen the Northern Illinois Food Bank. Does that fall under this?
So that is, that's kind of an anomaly.
Yeah. it's an
We may
umbrella.
want to have an exception for the Northern Illinois Food Bank. Or carve out separate money as a kind of sidecar request that goes along with this $4 million program. Because we have all those food pantries that are out there, and Northern Illinois Food Bank pretty much touches all of them in some way, to
Yeah,
some
it's
degree.
It's really an umbrella organization, and my concept of a food pantry is what most of us do. It's a little local thing, and you go over there, and it's the size of a factory, and they have a fleet of trucks, and it's this huge organization that supplies the smaller ones. So I would just say I would hate for them. I think we should be sensitive to the fact that they're special and different.
Yeah, so in considering food pantries, it was more the concept. Most of these are smaller organizations. So if we're gonna pay for rent, utility costs and things like that, that would help them out, buying food. That wouldn't come from Northern Illinois. Well, food comes from Northern Illinois Food Bank, but some of those other uses are not. So again, that's something we can increase this amount by a large number, or just consider, like I said, a sort of a sidecar allocation that we can vote on at our next standing meeting to include in this, because it's going to be a little while. We got to get the consultant on board until we can open this portal. We have a little bit of time if we want to add something in for the Northern Illinois Food Bank.
I just want to say, to make things more complicated, most of the money we give to the food pantries, they will probably give to the Northern Illinois Food Pantry Food Bank, because that's who they buy from. So,
Oh, there's actually money
yeah.
changes hands.
Mr. Tepe.
It is a problem and it is a challenge. For example, you've got Food for Greater Elgin, which is the primary food bank in Elgin. They get a lot of their food from Northern Illinois Food Bank, but at the same time, they provide a lot of the food for the food pantries in Elgin. And you have that same situation that happens in Aurora. So I don't think the number of $250,000 is enough. And I hate to admit this, but I really should have been more alert and more responsive when Ms. Bates proposed $5 million. Okay.
Thank you.
But we need to think about $15,000 is way too low for it'd be okay for a food pantry, but it wouldn't be right for, Food for Greater Elgin or the two large food pantries that are in Aurora.
What number would you like to see there?
Oh, probably more like 100,000.
100,000?
But we're still capped at 250.
Well, I don't like that number either.
Well, I know, but I guess
I think there's really only, Northern Illinois Food Bank could suck up a lot of money, but for instance, up by me, there's the Fish Food Pantry and the District 300 Food Pantry. They're not going to need anywhere near $100,000.
No, but again, we could give all the money to Northern Illinois Food Bank, for example, and tell them that it's their job to provide the other food banks, okay? That's still going to be objectionable to all the ones that think they have their own individual needs. Or we could give a lot of it to Food for Greater Elgin and say it's your job to also provide the food pantries there. But, you know,
Going up to 100,000 doesn't mean we're just going to have 3 applicants that get the full award. That's another way of saying what I was saying. Mr. Frost.
Well, I mean, what if for now we raise that 15 to 30? And correct me if I'm wrong, but all 4 of those categories, we fully expect all of those organizations to come back for another grant on the other side of the 4 million emergency. Like if we give them money out of this 4 million emergency fund, it doesn't preclude us from giving them more out of the larger.
No.
This was just to get it done fast and quick. So
It's a round 1 if this committee and the board wills it.
it's round 1 out of like 100 rounds. So, you know, I just want everybody, this isn't their final allotment. This is just to deal with emergencies.
Maybe.
being logical.
I would support going to 30 on this, but I don't know how you would do this, but if there was a way you could reach out to Northern Illinois Food Bank and work with them on this, because in the Agricultural Committee, which is where they also report to, they have mentioned that they could work specifically only with food banks within Kane County, because I think they service 9 counties.
Right.
Yeah, they mentioned that at the listening session as
Right,
well.
so they could work with only the organizations within Kane County, and they have a huge buying power as compared to a smaller food bank when they go to the grocery store to buy. So again, we may be getting a bigger bang from the buck if we just let Northern Illinois Food Bank work with all the other ones to take care of this.
8 to 1,
And that is-
$8 for every $1.
That's definitely
donated.
something we can do. We can work with Peter and reach out and kind of have a discussion with them on this concept, because I think it's a good idea. Again, this is an anomaly. Most of the food pantries their budgets are a lot smaller.
Right.
And so, yeah, if there's a way that, hey, give us $100,000 and we'll make sure it goes to all these food pantries, and then the food pantries can apply for, the utility and rent.
So
and things
saying
like
that though, if we set the limit at $30,000, does that preclude us from working with Northern Illinois Food Bank on a larger amount?
Well, it
and
could.
less on the
So
others?
I'm gonna first ask, since the first suggestion was $100,000.
I'm gonna go with 100.
Let's, Drew, you good with 100? Or
You
good
just
with
want to have
100?
that to give us flexibility.
It provides flexibility.
Yes, I
Doesn't
agree.
mean 3 applicants are gonna get the full award.
Mhm.
Sure. You're okay? Okay, Ms. Strathman, you okay with 100,000 for up to, for food?
Yes,
banks?
Mr. Chairman, I am. I support that.
Ms. Molina? Ms. Gums?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so 100,000 for, up to 100,000 for food pantries. And we will follow up with Northern Illinois Food Bank to see if there's a way we could craft coordination with them. So before they even apply, there's an understanding of the direction we're going to go. Because we will have to come back with the applications that come through, and we will have to say yes and no to them, just like we did last year with the CARES Act, and send it to the full board. So, okay, so I think we have everything. The total allocations have been determined to stay the same. We're gonna go up to, what was it? I can't keep it all track in my head now. For the second category, $100,000,
10 million, wasn't it?
10 million. Homeless shelters up to 300,000, and food pantries up to 100,000.
That sounds right.
Right to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So that being said, I think we've gone through all of the criteria that are necessary to put into the resolution. Vince, correct me if I'm wrong. Have we covered everything?
I think you went through everything. Again, I sent that template, so, I mean, if you could send us exactly what was agreed to, we can certainly work with you.
Yeah, I just took these off of that.
Okay.
So,
All right,
and all the things that needed input from us.
perfect.
So, yeah, we have covered everything. Okay. I think we are now ready for a vote. So all of these recommendations of criteria will be put into the resolution. That will then make its way to next week's executive committee meeting and then on to the full board. So unless there's any other conversation on the main resolution as it stands.
Brown moves to approve the resolution as discussed.
Great, second.
It's like, did we not have a first and a second already? Good call, Brown. Nice way to stay on track. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Franz,
Yes.
Martin, Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Kenyon, Sanchez.
Yes. Okay, resolution is approved. There is one more resolution on here. I put it on here just in case we were ready. It's just to extend the contract for our administrative assistant, Jenny Smith. Finance indicated that there's still some numbers that need to get worked out. So this will go to our special meeting next week, assuming that those numbers get worked out. And it's just to prolong her stay here with us. She indicated that she has been happy with the arrangement and would like to stay on as long as we need her. So
Passed.
what's that?
Passed.
Passed what?
Her test.
Oh, yes, we passed her test. She passed our. So this resolution will get called at the special meeting on Tuesday. That being said, sorry, this was such a long meeting, but so many important things for this committee to consider. Requires conversation. I know it doesn't work for everyone's schedule, but it is what it is. We got to get through this and we are. So
It was a good meeting.
thank you all for your patience and your participation. It's greatly appreciated. We have no old business or need for executive session, so I just need a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Franz moves, Ms. Bates seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.